Welcome, everybody. My name is Roxana Spulber, and I am a Change Management Officer at EMA. Thank you for joining for today's webinar. First, before beginning the webinar, I just need to make some housekeeping rules. This event will be recorded, and you can see your screen in HD mode. You just need to go on the button on the right hand side of the video and press the 720p or the 1080p mode. And now I'm giving the floor to our chair for today, Peter van Kerberhern, the head of clinical trials at the European Agency. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues. Everyone, very welcome at the important event. So for clinical trials in Europe, it's a major step forward that we have a centralized way of submitting dossiers, having by definition de facto harmonization in the trial dossier. We are 5 months in the regulation, and it's a perfect opportunity to see how we are doing. We have several people invited, many thanks for them, with experience with trials, submitting trials, authorizing, and they will have very nice slides on this. We will also bring people from the training environment and the sandbox, and we will also provide information on the steps forward. At the same time, we have the current statistics we bring through ActEU. And so we have a global picture on how we are all doing together in clinical trials in the Union. So again, very warm welcome, and I wish you very nice attendance, concentration, and especially motivation to pursue this change patients need and deserve in the Union and worldwide. Thank you. So, thank you. My first slide, we are 6 months in Cts, in fact 5 months. The current status, we are live. We are seeing a steady uptake in terms of volume of submissions. It's going steady. Every day we see trials coming in. We have something like plus 20 initial trials authorized. Status a couple of days ago. All planned training material was published, and the larger scope for the sandbox rollout is being planned. We have a dedicated Cts service desk in place. People are doing wonderful work also there. The system operations is monitored on a daily basis, and it's reported through governance structures. At EMA, we have done a small reorganization, because when the system went live, we have both to serve the users. This is the operational structure, training, support. And we have one IT project, bug fixing, backlog, new functionality. So we adapted our structure to better serve the users. Of course, and this is the nuance, serving people on a live system and further developing on the live system is different than just producing a system. Because the system is live and you cannot intervene when you want, so we have fixed maintenance windows, etc. So we are accommodating for this. What we did this year, especially the technical deliverables to improve system performance. and resolving technical users reported by the technical issues reported by the users, all supporting operational stability and a good user experience. This is what we have done up to date. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we also have a new Cts governance structure. On the top, we have the ActEU steering group. At the right, we have the EPOC, the early phase operational oversight group. This is for, in fact, the operational aspects, important items that would affect many people, many users. In purple in the middle, there we have, in fact, the CTS forum, which we would organize for at least 4 times a year. MS stands for member states. We have stakeholders, the users. These are people who are submitting trials. We have on the left people from the Commission. Thank you, Christophe. And at the bottom, we have EMA. So it's an info forum to discuss the proceedings of the real use of CTS. On the bottom, we have the continued IT delivery with the product owners from the member states on a monthly basis. This we do in an agile fashion. And at the bottom, we have the public events, like this one is one of them, also with CTS demos, training support material updates, communication events. So this is in one picture how we will see the interaction the next months. Next slide, please. Okay, so looking forward, how do we see the next months and how do we see next year? Very important is that end of January 23, we are at the end of the first phase of transition. So this means that the possibility for initial trial applications to submit under the Clinical Trial Directive would stop. This means that from then on, the backup procedure, the alternative procedure, isn't there anymore, and everything has to go through CTS. This means, and we are planning for this, that this means that CTS user training and support will continue. Onboarding new users, continuing updating of training materials, continuing training events, and we continue with the rollout of the CTS info forum. So, but this is important that we focus for next year on a very good, on an excellent user experience for sponsors and for member state users. The development plans, it's pending confirmation, as what we do in 22, ensuring operational stability, supporting users by resolving identified issues. This will remain a top priority. Users will be informed of plans for the development of new functionality, but this is pending confirmation. We have upcoming meetings for this. But this is in a nutshell how we see the support, how the project would run this year and in 23. In one word, supporting operational stability. This is in fact a top priority. If people are interested to look, I can highly recommend to look at the public portal. The authorized trials are available there and are a very good source of information to see how how the trials got there with all the documentation published. Many thanks for this.
Okay, so thank you very much, Peter, here in the room at the agency. So we would like to thank you so much for this introduction. So as per the agenda now, we will move to the next session 1 on Ctis and status update. And we will start with a presentation by Laura Piopo from the agency.
I would like to announce her. It's, okay, so she's a pharmacist, qualified, obtained a master in pharmacovigilance before joining EMA in the inspection department in 2009. She was responsible for GCP and pharmacovigilance inspections. Since 2017, she's working in the development of the clinical trials information system, defining and testing system functionalities in collaboration with European Commission, member states and sponsors, product owners. As part of the Cts development, Laura has been leading on the very important data protection aspects and has been actively involved in training and dissemination of knowledge on system functionalities to Cts user community. Hand over to you, Laura.
Thank you very much, Peter, for the kind introduction, and good morning, everyone. So this first presentation is to give you a flavor of the KPI of key performance indicators that the agency has been measuring since the implementation of the regulation. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So since the launch of the regulation, which occurred on the 31st of January of this year, together with the launch of the clinical trial information system, we have now a new IT platform, a unique IT system for the submission, evaluation, and supervision of clinical trials data in the European Union. So the agency, together with the European Commission and the member states, are closely monitoring the progress on the implementation of the CTR and the implementing acts. Also, in line with the Article 97 of the regulation, the European Commission shall assess and evaluate the impact of the clinical trials regulation on scientific and technological progress. So this has to be done on a regular basis over a period of 5 years. So by considering these requirements of the regulation, and also because of the launch of a new business change initiative that is Ctis, which also occurred in January of this year. Basically, the agency, in close collaboration with the European Commission and the member states, has prepared a report on KPIs, on key performance indicators, to measure the progress following the launch of and the applicability of the CTR and the launch of Ctis. So the first document, the first KPI report, has been published on the 20th of May. Was not by chance that we published on that day, because it was International Clinical Trials Day. And in the first edition of this report, you could see data and metrics covering the first 3 months since the launch of Ctis and the application of the regulation. So February, March, and April were reflected in the report of May. And now this week, on the 27th of June, we have actually published the second edition, the version 2 of the KPI reports, which of course covers the data from the previous months. So May data are reflected in the report that has been published in June. Can we go to the next one, please? So the KPI report, the document reflects these key performance indicators, which have been agreed within the EU regulatory network. As you might have seen from the document, there is a comparison between the data reported in Ctis and versus the data reported in EudraCT. Of course, EudraCT is the database that is used for clinical trial applications that are submitted under the Directive 2001-20. University. We have to keep in mind, though, that the two databases are fundamentally different, and there is a big difference on how clinical trials data are captured in Ctis and Udacity, not only for the clinical trial application for the CTA submission, but also for the outcome on the assessment, for capturing the National Competent Authority decision and the Ethics Committee opinion in Udacity. So comparing the two data, I think, is important to highlight how the two databases are substantially different in structure. In Ctis, we measure not only clinical trials, figures and numbers, but also clinical trial application, because we have to remember that for a single clinical trial, we can have one or more applications, also considering substantial modification, addition of a new member state concern, and so on. So the first report was published in May. We have now a new report published in June, and the idea is that we will publish on monthly basis. When looking at the report, it's important to remember the period of time that is covered. So Peter mentioned that already in the public website, we have over 20 clinical trial application authorized. In the published report, you can see a figure that is less. We only had 8 clinical trial application authorized at the time for the period of time until the end of May. Maybe we can have a look at the stats now in the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a screenshot, of course, of the graphs taken from the KPI report that is published, and gives you an idea of the increase in the number of clinical trial applications that were submitted in Ctis per month. So, of course, in February, we only had 9 clinical trial applications. The number then doubled in March when we had 18 clinical trial applications submitted, and then we can see really a stable increase in the numbers, in the figures, having now an overall number of 91 initial clinical trial application until the 31st of May of this year. We also had one substantial modification that you can see in turquoise on the top bar of the May reporting date. The next one, please. If we have a look now at the status of the clinical trial applications at the time, so until the end of May, and an overview of the sponsor conducting basically the trial being commercial versus non-commercial, we could see that basically there were 4 applicable statuses at the time: clinical trial applications that were withdrawn by the sponsor, clinical trial application that lapsed at the time of validation, all of them, they lapsed during that period of time at the time of validation, a number of trial authorized and under evaluation. Maybe here, just to clarify a bit on the terminology, with the term withdrawn, basically we refer to the fact that the sponsor, during the evaluation of the CTI, of the application, decided to proceed with the withdrawal of the application before a decision was issued. And this could be due to different reasons, because of technical mistakes in the submission of the dossier, because they noticed that there were inaccuracy in the dossier submitted, or because during the assessment they received a high number of requests for information and they decided it was better to withdraw the application and then in the future, if intended, to progress with the resubmission. Lapsed is different because it refers to clinical trials that were under evaluation and RFI were raised, requests for information were raised by the member states, and the sponsor did not manage to reply to the RFIs within the defined period. So if an RFI is not addressed, according to the regulation, automatically the application will lapse. So we could see that we had 8 withdrawn applications, 6 lapsed, and then 8 were authorized until 31st of May. And now if you look in the public website, we can see that it's over 20. So this is really indicative on how things are growing. And then we had many clinical trial applications under evaluation. And you can see from the color coding the difference between commercial and non-commercial sponsor. Next one, please. Thank you. Now, focusing on the 8 clinical trial applications that until the 31st of May had a decision, so they were all authorized by the member states, we can see that 7 of these clinical trial applications were submitted by non-commercial sponsor, and 1 of them were submitted by commercial sponsor, and also that the vast majority were for mononational clinical trials, having 7 of them, with mononational trial, and only 1 of them multinational trials, which actually had 14 member states concerned. Next one, please. Thank you. So this is still only focusing now on trials with a decision. So if you count, is 8 overall, and you can see the breakdown per trial phase and an indication, of course, of the nature of the trials that were conducted. So we had phase 2 trials, phase 3, and phase 4. And in the next slide, we can see the therapeutic area that basically was covered. Please consider that we only display values of the therapeutic areas that were applicable at the time. Of course, the list of therapeutic areas in the system is much broader. Here we just show the therapeutic areas that were applicable for the trials authorized within the selected period. The last slide, that is the next one, is on the RMS, just to give you, an idea of the assignment of the RMS between the member states concerned, because of course the role of the RMS is very important, is the member states in the lead for the assessment of part 1, and out of the 8 authorized applications, we could see that Denmark was the RMS for 3 of them, 1 for France, Norway had 2 applications, and then Spain and Sweden. So this is to give you a flavor of the latest version of the report that was published in June. Of course, in July, by mid and the end of July, you will have an updated version of the report covering the June, the submission period up to the end of June of this year. And I will stop here, Peter. So thank you, and back to you.
Thank you, Laura, for this very nice presentation. We are a little bit ahead of time. Can I use the moment to introduce our next speaker? This is Christophe Bonarens, Team Leader, Directorate General for Health and Food Safety at the European Commission, DG Santé. Christophe is an industrial pharmacist. Being a Belgian national, he started working for the Belgian Federal Agency of Medicines and Health Products in 2005, and in 2009 he took up the responsibility for the R&D division in charge of clinical trials applications. Christophe was the Belgian member and secretary of the Clinical Trial Facilitation Group. He was also part of the negotiations of the clinical trial regulation in 2013-2014. After a brief period working for the Association of Belgian Pharmaceutical Industry from 2016 onwards, he joined the European Commission in 2019. Christophe has worked on the Cts project and has been closely involved in the Cts governance, the independent audit, and the Commission decision on full functionality. Christophe, I hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and good morning to all of you. Can I have the slides on the screen, please? Peter, I know we're a little bit ahead of time, 1 minute to be correct, but I promise I won't be long today. I only have a couple of slides, basically to present, on the one hand, the transition period where we're currently in, and the transition period we will be in until the end of January 2025. And I will use my time today to emphasize the core objectives of the CTR, the driving principles in awareness. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So that clinical trial regulation we're talking about a lot today. Let's say this regulation was highly awaited for several years. It was published already in May 2014 with an aim to correct the, I would say, agreed shortcomings of the Clinical Trials Directive that is today in 2022 still applicable, but also to foster research in the Union whilst maintaining a high level of protection for participants to clinical trials. So there's a double objective there on which I will give you a little bit more information in the minutes to come, colleagues. The regulation became applicable on the 31st of January 22, so that's 1 day and 5 months ago, but is optional to be used by clinical trial sponsors for the course of 1 year. So that would be until the 31st of January 2023. After that date, every new clinical trial will need to be submitted and authorized under the principles and rules of the Clinical Trials Regulation. The Clinical Trial Regulation, nevertheless, acknowledges that a clinical trial that has been agreed cannot be shifted easily and suddenly to a new clinical trial framework. Therefore, it allows that trials that were authorized under the Clinical Trial Directive can continue under the rules of the Clinical Trial Directive until the 31st of January 2025. After that date, all ongoing clinical trials will need to be transitioned to the Clinical Trial Regulation principle. Next slide, please. This is a schematic overview of the period in time we're in. We're basically now at the point of the red dot on the arrow. And then looking back to where we come from, I think the starting point of the launch of the applicability of the CTR started a little bit less than 1 year ago, started on a Saturday morning on the 31st of July 2021, when we saw the publication of a notice in the official journal that confirmed that the clinical trial information system was fully functional. That publication was, of course, not a big surprise. It was a deliberate publication on that day, on a Saturday morning, to be sure that the CTR itself became applicable on the 31st of January 2022, exactly 6 months later, as foreseen by the legislation. The legislation, as I explained, has 2 transition periods, one of 1 year, in which we're almost at the middle now, during which clinical trials can be submitted under the CTR, but can also still be submitted under the CTD. Laura just gave us a very nice overview on how those numbers relate at the moment. But of course, it's a ticking clock, I would say, because on the 31st of January 2023, so that's a little bit less than 7 months from now, every new clinical trial needs to be submitted and authorized under the rules of the CTR. 2 years later, the transition period stops applying, and all CTD trials will need to be transitioned or will need to be non-active anymore. So this is, of course, the work of a long period in time that started in 2014 with the adoption of functional specifications for the CTIS, the core focus of today, which took us quite some time to develop, and which was audited against the functional specifications by the end of 2020, beginning of 2021. So I hope that whole transition period, which is rather complex to explain, is now clear for all of us. Next slide, please. So let's take a look to the objectives of the clinical trial regulation. I have 3 slides on that. The first slide and the second slide were the original objectives of the proposal as it stood published by the Commission in 2012. Also, by the way, in the month of July. It seems like important things for clinical trials always happen in July. First major objective, streamlining of the clinical trial authorization process. Why was this done? Because it was an acknowledged fact that the Clinical Trials Directive, although having been a very big step forward for the harmonization in Europe, still did not manage to harmonize the clinical trial authorization process across the Union. There were major differences in timeline, in requirements, in process, And so the clinical trial regulation streamlines that authorization process by putting in place one submission to every member state concerned by a given trial of a harmonized application through a single online interface with maximum timelines. Colleagues, you could see that I was putting a lot of emphasis on specific words in that sentence. One submission defined by legislation, no different submissions anymore, no different rules, no different portals, one submission, one set of documents. A harmonized application, that is what the CTR puts. The CTR also says no more paper files, no more sending of CDs, no more use of European portals here and there, one single online interface. And lastly, maximum timelines, clearly defined exchanges, some short, some perhaps a little bit longer, but with a clear aim to give predictability to this system and to say if you pass as a sponsor through that timeline, you get a decision by the end of it. The CTR also introduces the idea of assessment in two parts. It contains a pan-European part which contains, let's say, the scientific documents like protocol, investigators brochure, the investigation of medicinal product dossier, which is assessed commonly by reporting member states in close collaboration and again within defined timelines with member states concerned. So it's a common assessment driven by reporting member states to which all member states concerned can and should participate. In parallel to that, there's an assessment happening at the national level of each member state concerned on the more national parts like the informed consent, the financial modalities, the insurance, the advertising materials, and so forth and so on. The result of that parallel assessment process is one single decision that is valid for the member state, and that is the result of the conclusion of the part one, which is given by the reporting member state, and the conclusion on part two. It's important to underline there that there is an opt-out possible by each member state concerned on that part one conclusion by a reporting member state, but linked to certain conditions, being that you need to have voiced your concerns and consideration during the process. Next slide, please. So on top of making the application process more straightforward and more streamlined, the legislation emphasized that this should not endanger patient rights and patient safety for participants to clinical trials in the Union. Some examples there that even have the ambition to improve the patient safety and to improve the participant rights. There is now a system of coordinated safety assessment through work sharing across member states and streamlined safety reporting. There's no more national reporting of SUSARs here and there. Everything is streamlined at the European level. There are also strengthened and uniform rules on the protection of patients, on the ways that informed consent are given. There are special modalities given on things like cluster trials, on low intervention trials that have a more straightforward process. So there as well, the CTR put in place new rules and new clarity on how patient rights and safety should be protected. Those of you that were listening when I started my presentation, hear that those two objectives were really the part of the Commission proposal that was published a little bit less than 10 years ago. The next slide please, gives an objective that gained traction throughout the negotiation: transparency. Transparency of clinical trial information and clinical trial data was one of the important additions, the important political instructions during the negotiations of the CTR. Transparency has been defined as a baseline. It means that everything in the European portal in the clinical trial information system is publicly available unless it would be submitted to the exceptions defined in the CTR, which are related to the protection of commercially confidential information, the protection of personal data, and the protection of the internal supervision and decision process within a member state. In other words, and that's very important to underline, you need to find an exception to make something not published in the CTIS. And a lot of information and a lot of energy went into defining an addendum to the functional specifications of CTIS that tries to strike a balance between protection of CCI, protection of personal data, and the publication requirements. Rather complex matter on which we will have additional information published and additional guidance published in the next couple of weeks and months. Transparency was also added to give to the general public information on the status of a given trial in a given member state. Was a given trial authorized by a member state? On which basis? Is it still recruiting? Is it ended? Is it temporarily halted? That is for each trial in the Union available or should be available for, at a member state level. Last but not least, the CTR also introduces obligations for result reporting within set timelines and puts in place specific public reporting at layman level of the clinical trial results. Next slide, please. It should be clear to everybody that this, of course, takes a lot of work to implement on the terrain. I saw some of the questions already. Seems like we still have work to do, but extensive question and answers were already delivered on the interpretation of the CTR. I'm of course speaking from Commission level. We have prepared this in collaboration with the Clinical Trial Expert Group, and we will update Q&As progressively where needed. Additional templates, for instance, on the expectations of the Part 2 have been published. There is a lot of specific information on the UDRELIX Volume 10, which is the official publication point of information on clinical trials from Commission point of view. We have published implementing acts and delegated acts, for instance, on the safety coordination, for instance, on GMP and GCP inspections. We have published, and that actually is still work in progress. We have published as well a delegated act on the laboring requirements that reintroduces the rules of Annex 13, the old CTD, under the CTR. That is still under preparation, but will be published normally over summer periods. I also want to say as sort of a last part of the contribution that for the first time, we also have a formal group in Europe called the Clinical Trials Coordination and Advisory Group, which is the platform, the official platform defined in the CTR to exchange information between member states and us as Commission on the experience acquired with CTR. That group is constituted by the national contact point, which is also a new concept under the CTR for each member state, the person or instance that is responsible for the coordination of the processes on authorization of a clinical trial, substantial modification, and so forth at member state level. So a very important concept also for some of the discussions today. Next slide, please. I am at the end of my presentation. I still have 1 minute left, but Peter, I think you can kindly forgive me for that. I thank you for the attention and would be happy to do some questions and answers in the next session. Thank you very much, colleagues, for giving me the floor today.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Christophe. Very nicely done. And indeed, the goal of the regulation is to increase transparency, at least in the Union. It's perhaps we can start with a couple of questions. Many thanks for all the colleagues who have been in the preparation of this workshop, all the people behind the scenes, also people sending in questions, preparing the answers. We can start. For example, I have one question. Thank you, Roxana. Will planned updates be announced in advance of CTS? It would be very helpful to have an estimated start date for future system improvements. Yes, as the increased allowed file size limit. Yes, we know this. Just to answer it in a structured way, yes, we are looking to have a dedicated page, at least for the member state or for the POs, where they can have the release planning announced. If there are changes to the release planning, that this page is also updated. We are working on the fix for the file size. Meanwhile, people have to split their large PDF in smaller pieces and upload these. There are many possibilities how to split PDFs, so it's not really a big technical issue. The next question, will CTS be announced to allow substantial modifications while a different SM is under evaluation if part 1 and part 2 are not coincident? Yes, we know this. It's on our planning, but unfortunately we have no firm date for which we can commit this. The Article 11, as it is, the simple way, this is already available in the system, but to allow SMs when another part is under evaluation, no, this not. The download functionality to provide table of contents and submission dates and timeout, submission time and date and time. When will CTS be announced and enhanced to provide submission evidences with a complete view of what was submitted? This we have to see on our planning. For the moment, it's not available. What we would advise is that people use screenshotting for the moment until this is implemented. The other questions, and I would propose we rearrange a little bit because we have people from our panel who cannot stay the whole morning. The question, in fact, it's all for data protection, GDPR. Will EMA generate a table of statement of compliance for the GDPR document? This is for Laura.
Thank you, Peter. I can take this one. Thank you, Peter, and colleagues for raising this. So the question is, will the EMA generate a template statement of compliance for GDPR? So here we are referring to the statement of compliance that is provided in the form section of an initial clinical trial application. And this placeholder has been implemented in the system in line with the requirements of Annex 1.R of the regulation that says that the sponsor should confirm that clinical trials data have been processed and will be processed in compliance with the principle of GDPR. So for this, the colleagues from CCMO, actually from the Netherlands, have produced recently a statement of compliance that is available on the public domain. And there are some discussions taking place on having something similar at European level. So yeah, I would say we are discussing this also in collaboration with the Commission and the Member States to have a simple statement harmonized that can be used for the trials and referring to the fact that the principle of GDPR will be followed when processing personal data as part of CTA submission. So yes, but maybe in the meantime it's also helpful if you consult the CCMO public website because they have recently published, I think at the end of May, a template in this respect. And we are discussing to have a European, let's say, harmonized version of this template as well.
Many thanks. The next question needs. Wait a minute. needs the GDPR statement to be signed by the sponsor, or can the contracted CRO sign on behalf? Then there's a reference to a member state that would require, it would surprise me, a wet inked signature. Laura, can you also take this question on?
Yeah, I would refer to Article 71 of the regulation that says that the sponsor can delegate some of all of the activities to a CRO, to another organization. So as long as the contract is clear between the parties on who is responsible for what, I would say yes, that this can also be provided. I mean, if the CRO is in charge of the whole submission. On the signature, we are also discussing this point because, as we know, the provision of personal data and personal elements in the documents submitted in CTIS should really be kept to the minimum according to the principle of data minimization of the GDPR. And the regulation per se does not really call to have signed documents. However, we are aware that especially for the Part 2 documents, there might be national requirements, national legislation requiring to having signed documentation. So we have also a clarification, I think, in the Commission Q&A, and I don't know if Christophe would like to further complement, but an important clarification has been provided in the Commission Q&A published in May, clarifying that signatures are not per se really required on routine basis, although it is acknowledged that at the member states level there can be some specific requirement for this. So I would refer really to the clarification in the Commission Q&A. Don't know, Christophe, if you would like to comment on this, because you've really been the lead of drafting this.
No, indeed, important statements here, because there seems to be some confusion in the network on this. The CTR as such does not require signatures. It could, however, be that there are national legislations, but then we need a very strong legal basis. I mean, it needs to be in legal text, not just in common habits or in requirements that are set through the habits of the last couple of years. There is a very strong instruction from data protection side to not publish, to not require signatures when they're not required. And the CTR itself implies, and CTIS executes this, that as soon as you sign off, you launch a clinical trial application in CTIS, you acknowledge as a sponsor that everything that is in there is in line with the reality, is in line with the rules of the CTR, and so forth and so on. So this is a very, very important point. And there seems to be some confusion in the network on this. Some member states still require some documents to be signed with signature. I am supposing that this is done on the basis of a strong national basis, which can be clarified at a national and potentially in a later stage also at European level. Thank you, Laura. Good addition, and thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Christophe. Peter, maybe can I, because I've seen one on the guidance on protection of personal data in CCI, and there was a reference to the scientific advice, and I think the point that was raised is correct. And actually, I would like to say thank you for raising this, because now I don't know in which row is the question, but I've read it before and was saying that basically the scientific advice is not listed in the guidance document as one of the documents that can be for which the publication can be deferred. And it's true because we have a screenshot in the guidance that only refers to the protocol. Basically, when working on the system, then we have enhanced the functionality and included scientific advice in order to have the publication of the scientific advice happening at the same time as the protocol. So to address the question, you are correct. Yes, thank you, is this question. So there is the possibility to defer the publication of scientific advice and have the publication occurring at the same time as the protocol. The screenshot basically will be improved, and also at the end of the document you have the list of all the applicable documentation that can be submitted in CTIS, and we will make it clear that scientific advice can also be deferred and published later on. The timing is the same as the protocol. So I think there was a reference here to the screenshot, and indeed has not been updated. So thank you for raising this.
Many thanks. Colleagues, I have a question on inspection reports. Is it something that, Laura, you can take together with Noemi? So how can inspection reports be kept confidential when they have CMC-related content?
Yeah, because they're saying that there is not a possibility to have a not for publication version, correct?
Yeah.
Maybe if we can. This we need to look at the system functionality though, because, okay, here I guess we are referring to inspection reports that are provided by the clinical trial sponsors for inspections that are done by third countries' authorities. Because, you know, in Cts we have two inspection reports that are uploaded, the ones provided by the EU inspectors, and there is a dedicated module for this that is not visible to the sponsors. So I assume the request here is for inspection report provided by the sponsor for inspections done by third countries' authorities. We need to look at the system functionalities because there are no particular differences for inspection report compared to other documents that we have in the system, for which you have the two versions, for publication and not for publication. As Christophe was mentioning in his presentation, and we have mentioned this in our training several times, the regulation is clear on the fact that personal data and CCI should be protected. They are exempted from publication rules. So that's why we have the two versions, for publication and not for publication, in order to allow the sponsor to provide the complete document in the slot not for publication, and then redact personal data or elements of CCI in the version that is published. So my answer to this is that we have to look at the system functionalities, but there are no exception for inspection report provided by the third countries' authorities compared to other documents. So the principle should be the same.
Many thanks. Perhaps the last question on CCI. Based on the first assessment reports being made public in Cts, we think that the volume of data about the IMPs is huge. Could recommendations be developed for health authorities to limit the information shared in them?
Yeah, that's a very good point. We would need to look at which trial phase we are referring to here, though, because consider that only for category 1 trials, so phase 1 trials and so on, sponsor can request a deferral of the structured data and all the documents in relation to the product. For phase 2, 3, and 4, the information on the product using the trial is already published from CTIS. So we will have to see the extent of the information on the product that was reflected in the assessment report, and consider that the regulation calls for publication and transparency. So structured data on product retrieved from XCVMPD are published. The sponsor can still delay the publication of IB, of investigator brochure. And we're also addressing this in this guidance for reduction to have an harmonized approach and aligned approach between publication of sponsored documents and member states documents. So we will have to see more on this specific case, but it's something that we are discussing with the member states. This concept of taking into account the use of deferrals, how much is published from the sponsor side, and take the similar approach from the member states side, because the member states, they can also defer the publication of their assessment report if there is a deferral that is requested by the sponsor. So it's part of the discussion within the networks and how we will make the best use of a new system. Basically, it's a new way of working.
Many thanks. Thank you, Laura. Then we have other questions. Most of the questions are for Christophe from the Commission. It's part 2 documents. Some member states request a sub-principal investigator their CV, others not. Can we have a single approach for all member states in the Union?
Thank you, Peter. I find this an excellent question, and it gives me the possibility to re-emphasize what I also said during my slides. If a regulation is silent on something, member states can make additional rules. This is not the case if the legislation clearly defines what the legal rules are. For the CTR, the documents that are part of a clinical trial application are defined in Annex 1. There's a Part 1 description and a Part 2 description. If member states require things that are not in that list, this is not backed by legislation. Can they do that? Of course they can. They can launch that in the system. The system itself does not do an intelligence check on the question. But there is, and I strongly want to emphasize this, there is no legal basis to requiring such things that are not in the legislation. So the question is, can we have one single approach? My answer is that is already there. And I would really urge sponsors that make such comments or that see some questions arise to push back on this in the clinical trial authorization phase, to really give the signal that the submission package, the way trials are authorized, has changed in Europe and has now a harmonized package that needs to be submitted. So the answer is at least in my head quite straightforward. If it's not in the CTR, it does not exist. And specifically principal investigators, I do not see that word in the CTR, so it does not exist. Thanks, Peter. Good question.
Many thanks. Then we have another very important one. Will a transition period be extended? Some countries are not prepared for Part 2 evaluation. This may lead to not be able to submit subsequent substantial modifications until all initial approvals are being released by all member states concerned.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Peter. Again, quite excellent question, and it allows me to give a very clear answer. An extension of the transition period would need to be done through a legal text, because the transition period, the obligations, they're all in the CTR itself. So if we were to extend the transition period, you need a legal text, which is the prerogative of the European Commission. I can tell everybody here today and everybody in the network, there is no such initiative ongoing. We are not extending the transition period. The CTD is ending on the 31st of January 2023. There's no way around that. Some countries seem to not be prepared for Part 2 evaluation. It is correct that there are some teething things in one specific country. Those of you that want to take a look at that can take a look to the public minutes of the Clinical Trial Advisory Group. It's black and white on there. But I would want to remind everybody as well that the CTR foresees a tacit approval on the condition that the Part 1 assessment is done. So even in those countries that would say we're not ready for Part 2 evaluation, well, there would be an infringement, so that would be quite a serious matter, to say the least. But even in the case that nothing happens on Part 2, the trial can be authorized, patient can be included, and the trial can start even if no action is taken on the Part 2. So, and I see this question coming back several times. There seems to be a hope or a wish or whatever in the network that this transition period will be prolonged. I can say with a hand on my heart, this is not the political intention of the Commission at this stage. So thank you, Peter, for pointing that out. The transition period will end, the first transition period will end on the 31st of January 2023, and the use of CTIS and the CTR will become applicable after that date for every new clinical trial authorization in the Union. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. I'm looking at the other questions also in the interest of time. Yes, so in fact, all the questions on transitioning are answered. All the questions on documents that need to be signed, they are done. Is EMA, or perhaps one question, is EMA or the Commission overviewing the CTR implementation in all countries? Then the remark, competent authority seems aligned, but most ethics seem one step behind and unable to clarify sponsor queries, especially for countries transitioning from local ethics committee to a central ethics committee.
Thank you, Peter. It's a good question as well. Are we overviewing the CTR implementation in all countries? There's a double answer. On the formal legal basis, it's up to us as Commission to oversee the CTR implementation. As I said in my previous response, we're doing that with the help of the Clinical Trial Coordination and Advisory Group. So we're taking a close eye on the high-level implementation in all countries. That's the one side of the answer. The other is that EMA, Commission, and the heads of medicines agencies are also working together under the ACT EU initiative to identify major issues, to get a resolution by those that are best placed to resolve it. So there's a close eye as well from the 3 organizations in Europe that are involved in clinical trials to make sure that this legislation becomes a success. And then there's a second component to your question. The national competent authorities seem aligned, but most ethics committees seem one step behind. I'm going to be perhaps a little bit provocative. Those terms, national competent authorities, ethics committees, as a commission and as a reader of the CTR, those terms do not exist. There's one mention of ethics committee in the text, which giving ethics committee a veto right at the end, provided that national legislation allows them that right and provides for a procedure. National competent authorities not even mentioned in the text except for the inspection responsibilities. Those concepts are old concepts from the CTD. The new clinical trial regulation stops at the member states level and says it's up to the member states to organize the interaction between ethics, the ethics review, who is doing what, all up to the member states. At the CTIS level, there's possibilities to organize that. Does that mean that there is no problems, that everybody is already aware of that? Of course not. We're going to a change process. There's always teething process in such major changes. I would personally recommend people not to contact ethics committees in the field, not to contact national competent authorities, but to really benefit of the fact that there's a national contact point that is the intermediate for the processes in the member state on the CTR. Those are the people that have a legal mandate to give a member state position on questions related to the review within that member state. Thank you, Peter. I think we're out of time for questions, but I found it very interesting to be able to give some clear messages on the new CTR. So thank you for this, and back over to you.
Thank you, Christophe. Many thanks. It's all change. It's all change. And how do we do change? Step by step, continuous focus, and we never give up. This is how we do change. Many thanks. So we have, I have to thank very much everybody, the speakers. For now, we have a break and we see each other again at 10:40. Nice break. Thank you. Hello, colleagues. Monique Al. She is head of the National Clinical Trial Office in the Netherlands. She works for the Central Committee on Research Involving Human Subjects, the CCMO, in the Netherlands. Monique Al has a PhD in human biology, and she has worked for several nutritional and pharmaceutical companies in the field of clinical research. In 2001, she started as a scientific staff member at the Central Committee on Research Involving Human Subjects, the CCMO in the Netherlands. Since July 21, she is head of the National Clinical Trial Office located at the CCMO. Please, Monique, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter, and thanks to everybody for organizing this meeting. And I'm very much willing to share some experiences from the Netherlands. I think in general, I think probably everybody will recognize that we were and are very exciting to use the new system, to use CTIS, and start working according to the rules of the clinical trial regulation. But on the other hand, we also see there is some anxiety to use the system, and to instead of entering the system, people are avoiding the system. And I want to emphasize that for everybody, at the side of the regulators, at the side of the sponsored, it's all new and it's all learning by doing. So please don't be afraid. Start using the system. We are much willing to assist you as far as we can. And now I share some experience, not all. And the first one, next slide, please, is on the transition period. Well, the timing has been explained by Christoph, but we do receive some questions, so I want to bring some points of attention to you. Please, next slide. With respect to, oh, that's the previous one. Okay. Okay, yeah, thank you. So if you want to transfer your clinical trial from CTD to CTR, there are some points of attention. There is a much more explanation in the Q&A from the Commission at Elderlex Volume 10. But here are some important points: that you can only transfer active clinical trials without any pending or ongoing assessment in any of the EU member states. So if you have a substantial modification still under review, you can't transfer. But also if your clinical trial is on hold in a member state, you can't transfer your trial either. If you want to transfer your clinical trial, it has to comply with the clinical trial regulation as regards to the substantial requirement. And it's up to the sponsor. It's the sponsor responsibility to assess the compliance to the CTR. Well, you need a new cover letter, and you have to complete all the structured data in CTIS. And if you have a multinational clinical trial, the protocol should be harmonized or at least consolidated. And there we receive a lot of questions. What is harmonized and what is consolidated? That will be explained in the next slide. And also important, sorry, yeah, okay, let's say I can, but also important to say so is that for a multinational clinical trial, you can only transfer the clinical trial for the member state in which the clinical trial was already authorized under the CTD. If you want to add a new member state to the clinical trial, you can only do that after the transition, so not during the transition. Okay, next slide, please. So an harmonized protocol, well, rather simple. An harmonized protocol is completely identical in every member state concerned. It has everybody the same version and the same date, and the content is exactly the same. Do you have clinical trial protocols in the EU member states which are different, which have different version date of versions or date? You have to harmonize it before you transfer your clinical trial, and you can do that via submitting substantial modifications under the directive to each of the member states concerned to harmonize, and at the end you have one harmonized protocol which is ready to start the transition in CTIS. There is also the option of a consolidated protocol. And what's the difference? The difference is that it is not identical, completely identical in all member states concerned, but the core protocol information will be, of course. So in a consolidated version, you do have the, well, it's called the CT number, unless it's consolidated still under the CTD. The title of the clinical trial is the same: primary objective, primary endpoint, and the definition of the end of the clinical trial, and the main inclusion and exclusion criteria are the same. Next slide, please. Certainly, a consolidated protocol should also have a specific date and a specific version, but you can indicate in the consolidated protocol what the difference are between the member states, between the already authorized protocol versions in the member states. So I just want to give you some examples. As for instance, there is a sub-study which is not, which is part of the protocol, but is not performed in all member states concerned. or you do have a clinical trial protocol which is with existed in a phase 1 and a phase 2, and not all member states will participate in phase 1, but they will participate in phase 2, or minors are not included in a certain member state, will only include adults. And so these differences you can indicate at the start, and in an appendix to the protocol you can explain or write down the difference between the member states. So that's another option. For a consolidated version, where you of course make very clear what the different versions were between the member state and what the differences are. But for a consolidated version, you don't need to have a substantial modification. You can make your own consolidated protocol, and it's ready for transition. Okay, next slide, please. So here's the overview of the documentation, which is now currently in the Q&A of Utrecht Volume 10. I have to say that there is some discussion about it, so please be aware that it might be updated. But for now, for the Part 1 application, you should submit a cover letter, an application, the application form is the structured data directly into Ctis, the harmonized or the consolidated protocol, the IB, all GMP relevant documents, the IMPD, and from all these documents are the latest approved versions. With respect to the non-IMPs, which is now called auxiliary medicinal products, well, they will not be there in all clinical trials, but if you have also submit the latest approved versions of these documents. So during the transition, the member state will not assess, but they will, of course, check if you have submitted the validated, if the documentations you have submitted are valid. Please be aware that the transparency rules will start. So we will also check whether you have indicated the right category of the clinical trial, and you as a sponsor have to take into account that you can submit redacted and unredacted versions. And again, I want to emphasize the signatures again. They are not mandatory, and to be clear, they are not mandatory for most of the documents in Ctis, but be aware that those signatures should, of course, be there in your trial master file. So don't mix it up. In your trial master file, you do have to sign documents, but not in the Ctis. Okay, next slide, please. And for the Part 2, for now, it's the latest approved version of the subject information sheet and the informed consent form. If there are documentation in the clinical trial application of Ctis, which was not mandatory under the CTD, that is mandatory under the CTR, you can upload a blank document. So, for instance, in the Netherlands, we have a document on biological samples, for instance. It's not necessary that you upload this document during transition. You can upload and say that it was not mandatory and has been assessed under the CTD. Here you can see the text. Okay, next slide, please. So this is an overview of the CTAs in the clinical trial applications in CTIS on May 20. Laura just told me that there was an updated version, but I missed it. So, but I think the view is more or less the same. You see that there are applications, so hooray, hooray. But you also see that there are, well, the green one are the one which have been authorized. The blue one are still under evaluation. Orange will mean that the clinical trial application is withdrawn by the sponsor, and orange mean that the clinical trial application is lapsed during the validation. Next slide, please. And it is our experience that we see a high number of considerations due to the technical features of CTIS, and a relatively high number of lapsed applications. So the next slides for me will bring you a little bit along how you should upload your documentation and how you should respond to an RFI. And this reference documentation can also be found on our website. Next slide, please. So I think very important to say that the title of your document, of your PDF, and I can't point it out, but it's on the right top corner. So the name of your file will directly be the title of your, previous slide, of the title of your document in Ctis. And this title cannot be changed if you have to update a new version. So please don't mention any version number or dates in the title of your document. The system will automatically give it version 1, your document, and the date, which is the date of submission, but you can adapt it. You can modify the title, you can give your own version number, your own date, and then you have a system version. That's always the first document you upload will be system version 1. If you update the document, the system will give it the system version 2. Next slide, please. Because of the many documents which will be in the system, and everybody will give their own names to the documents, it will really be a mess if you want to have a complete overview. Therefore, we have come up with a structured coding of the documents following Annex 1 of CTR, Annex 1 of CTR. This is an example. This has been discussed in the Clinical Trial Coordination Group and has been endorsed by all members of the Clinical Trial Coordination Group. So you will probably hear more of it, that we really want you to follow a more structured approach in naming of the documents. Next slide, please. So here, just for the protocol and just an example, in the protocol, you say D1, because section D of Annex 1 and protocol, and then you will fill in the AUCT number, which belongs to the protocol. For instance, if you have a CV of the investigator, M1, investigator, the name of the investigator and clinical trial site, will be a rather long title, so you can use abbreviations for it, but then it's very clear. So, okay, thank you. Next slide. I have to hurry a little bit, I see. What I also want to address, that we receive a lot of questions on the documents in the forms, and especially the one with respect to the GDPR compliance. It has been explained by Laura that there is one general statement on the GDPR compliance by the sponsor, and it should be uploaded in the form sections, but be aware that there can also be documentation in the part 2, where the member state asks more specifications for the GDPR compliance on a national level. So the Netherlands also have it, a general statement and more detailed information, where the data is collected and who has access to the data, how the archiving of the data is organized, etc. So please be aware that there are 2 different things. Next slide, please. So, and then if you receive an RFI from the member state where you have to respond on considerations, you have to change your application if you have to upload new documents, or you have to upload updates of new documents. And I want to point your attention that you have the possibility to respond on every considerations in the system, but you can also upload a letter. It's in the middle of this slide, where you can respond to one or more consideration. So just have the answers to the consideration in one document, and this is split in section specifically for quality, so it will not become public, and other questions not related to quality. There is a possibility at your consideration to add a document. It's on the right low corner. And then this is only documentation to support your answer. If you have to upload, for instance, a new protocol, please don't do it there, but do it at the section Change Application. Next slide, please. And again, you can update your documentation, then you will receive a new version. You have a new version of a protocol, you need to use the button Update. But if you click on Add Document, you will upload a new document, which will receive system version 1. So For an update, for a new version, use the update button. If it's a completely new document, use the button add document. Okay, next slide. I will skip that for the sake of time. Sorry. Next slide. I also want to make you aware of the possibility to resubmit a clinical trial. It's easy to go there. You go to the section in the summary initial, what you want to resubmit in case your study has been lapsed or you have withdrawn. Then you can resubmit the same clinical trial. The number which you already have, the AUC10 number, will be the same, but the end of the numbering will increase from 00 to 01. Please be aware, if you use the resubmission button, the system will automatically change every document with version 1 and the date of the day you will resubmit. So you have to change manually again all the right version numbers and date of the specific documents. So be aware of that, otherwise it's not consistent. Okay, next slide. And that is the end. Oh no, I want to make you aware of release notes, also important, where you can see the already known issues in CGIS and the workarounds good to take care of if you are using CGIS. And I think this was really the last slide. So thank you. Thank you for your attention and my apology for extending the time.
Many thanks, Monique. Very useful. Yeah, the release notes and known items list are amongst the mandatory lecture documents for all users. Many thanks. Let me announce the next speaker from Finland. So we are going over a series of member states every time addressing other aspects. Many thanks, Monique, for the very nice explanation. Uti Kontinen is a General Secretary and Group Leader. She's a Master in Science for the National Committee on Medical Research Ethics in Finland. She has served the National Medical Research Ethics since 2001. She is Finland's representative on the European Commission Clinical Trials Expert Group and a member of the EMA Clinical Trials Information System Expert Group. She has been a full member of the European Network of Research Ethics Committees since 2013 and is a board member since 2021. Please, Uti, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter, for your nice introduction, and good day to everyone. I hope you can hear me. Everything's okay with the lines. Good, thank you. I am from Finnish National Ethics Committee, and for this presentation, I consulted also experts from National Competent Authorities, FIMEA. So thank you, our colleagues there. Can I have a second slide, please? Yes, thank you. So I start with a short presentation on how Finland has implemented the CTR. The old Act on Medical Research Ethics, medical research is important concerning transition period. All the provisions concerning clinical trials are deleted from the new version of this Act. However, when the CT is processed in accordance with the Clinical Trials Directive, the old version of this Act shall apply. We have a new Act on clinical trials, but I'll tell you more about that later. There are some amendments made also to the related laws, and there is a decree on fees that was confirmed in January, as well as formation of the National Ethics Committee. These additions and amendments entered into force at the same time as the application of the portal started this year. Next slide, please. Some basic solutions stipulated in Act on Clinical Trials. Finland is one of those European countries where a straightforward organization model takes place. There is only one competent authority and ethics committee to evaluate CTs. The new law provides, for example, division of labor and the obligation to cooperate between authorities However, both authorities are independent, and this national committee, TUKIA, is organizationally separate from the agency. Both authorities evaluate both parts of the application. Fimea is in charge of assessing report part 1 when Finland is a reporting member state, and Fimea also makes the national decision. As in many ethics committees in Europe, TUKIA does not evaluate the quality part of the Part 1 application. TUKIA is responsible for drafting the assessment report Part 2, and Fimea can express views on Part 2 application. Next slide, please. As the changes in the ethical evaluation were identified as significant, a 2-year change project on ethics evaluation was implemented in Finland. It contained, for example, assessment on training needs among ethics members and secretariat, development of the IT system, and drafting different guidelines. Part of the change management was, of course, national pilot, which was conducted by Fimea and TUKIA. During and after project, especially lately, during this half-year period, cooperation with Fimea has been close. In general, Finnish authorities have invested a lot in developing cooperation, workflows, and division of labor. We have also organized several information sessions for sponsors in which the academic research community has also actively participated. Next slide, please. Few words about national requirements. Finland is very serious about not imposing any special national solutions or requirements. We comply with the content of the regulation as far as possible. Of course, the application package in Part 2 contains issues that need to be resolved nationally, but we have also tried to be open and consistent with them. So this means we stick to Annex 1. English is accepted in Part 2 documentation. There is no requirement of protocol summary in Finnish for TUKIA, this national committee. Among the questions submitted in advance were questions regarding signatures, as already previous speakers have mentioned. It is known that there are some national rules, example concerning site suitability, and the signatures cannot be left out in some member states. However, the needed confirmation certificate corresponding to the signature is interpreted as to be fulfilled as a user logs into the system based on the user management in Ctis. So in Finland, we don't require signatures, and this applies also protocol and data protection statement. Then another pre-submitted question was about invoices. Can the invoice be uploaded in the Ctis portal, or will the local authorities send them via separate procedures to the sponsors? The requirement is member state specific and needs to be consulted with each member state concerned. According to the regulation, member state can only charge one processing fee per application. In Finland, Fimea collects the fees. Billing address or statement of exemption must be provided under proof of payment section in Ctis. Based on Finnish regulation on payments, academic sponsors are exempted from the fees, and commercial sponsors' fees are approximately the same as under directive. And then Part 2, national requirements. This national committee has published a list of requirements related to Part 2 application, and it will be translated into English soon. Next slide, please. So far, there has been only 7 applications on the portal concerning Finland. And overall situation up to date is 1 authorized transition trial, 1 withdrawn, 1 application that did not pass the validation phase, and 4 under evaluation. In 3 of the applications, Finland is a reporting member state, and one of them is multinational clinical trial. Next slide, please. This is a screenshot from public portal. It took us 23 days to authorize the transition trial. And based on that experience, we know that the process can be much faster than that. Next slide, please. As we have had few applications so far, the following observations are also preliminary. Just first, a short comment on user management. We haven't had any major problems in registering the cities, but we know that sponsors have experienced more challenges, and EMA is responding that by organizing extra support, which is very good indeed. Next slide, please. Workflow and evaluation. Word versions was mentioned already before, and we have noticed that they have been used in some applications. This cannot be recommended since usually the version date of Word document is not stable. And then one of the pre-submitted questions is, when RFI is used, will there be an email notification to the applicant about RFI being added to Ctis? This is not the case. The system does not send automatic messages to email. All communication is done in Ctis. But also Finnish authorities have to admit that we have not been able to avoid communication outside Ctis, not so far. Not only have we communicated with sponsors, but also between authorities and also across borders. So we think that it would be very useful to have a general chat function in place. And responses to RFIs. Already on the basis of a few evaluated applications, we have seen that some sponsors prefer answering in separate document rather than in structured data fields. Yeah, that's possible and that's allowed. But for the authorities, it's very important to use structured data. For example, member state must be able to reliably track whether they accept something in the RFI or not. For the sake of simplifying things and to minimize the workload, we think it is important to avoid duplicate downloads. Next slide, please. Debate on what to do with patient cards, questionnaires, diaries, and other so-called patient-facing documents has been lively last couple of months. This was also one of the pre-submitted questions. I have good news on that. Commission will publish answer to this question in questions and answers guideline in August. Another very tricky question have been made already some years ago. What happens if the Part 2 assessment report is issued first and evaluation of Part 1 has not finished yet, but may require changes to, for example, consent procedure? How to update Part 2 documents? This matter is still under discussion, and of course, common procedure is needed at European level. Next slide, please. Few words about transition trials once more. The guidelines of the transition period have also recently been prepared and updated. Assessing of the documentation takes place only in the validation phase. Otherwise, the procedure is straightforward and rather technical by nature. According to the transitional trial training materials, sponsors may be advised to withdraw the request for transitioning the trial and submit the request for substantial amendment under the CTD. We think this could be done during validation phase via RFI. And what should assessment reports and national decision on transition trial include? As I mentioned, transition of the ongoing trial is very technical by nature, and we use blank documents with minimal reference information on CT concerned. Next slide, please. Just a short comment. Publication policy seems challenging for sponsors. There is a need for clarity on what will be or won't be published and how, or maybe more training on that issue. Next slide, please. I would like to conclude that our experience is that processing of applications in Ctis is efficient, from the point of view of the authorities, system works and applications have been processed on time with our, of course, limited experience. This can be said. Ctis is being further developed and authorities are well committed to that work. The past 6 months, 5-6 months have been very instructive indeed. And also it is to be hoped that good and constructive cooperation between authorities and sponsors will continue from now on. So thank you for your attention. This was all I had on my mind.
Thank you, Uti. Very important indeed. It's about change between sponsors and member states, also between agencies and between agencies and ethics, all in line with sponsors. It will go further very smooth. Let me introduce the next speaker, Stefan Strasser. He is head of clinical trials for 2 Austrian agencies. He's trained as a medical doctor at the Medical University of Innsbruck in Tyrol, Austria. Since 2009, he works as a clinical assessor for the Austrian Medicines and Medical Devices Agency. As of 2019, Stefan holds the position of head of department for clinical trials and is in charge of the operational implementation of CTR and the medical devices regulation for aspects of clinical trials. He's also the national contact point for CTR as the Austrian representative to several European working groups on clinical trials for medicines and medical devices. Please, Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter, for this kind introduction. Good day to everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I think it's okay if I share my presentation from my computer, or let me do this.
If you can, please.
Yes, so somebody would have to give me authorization, please, as I'm not the moderator.
Done. You could.
Okay, great. Thank you. So please give me a short confirmation that you can see this and adjust this and not any unnecessary windows or stuff.
Yes, we can see it, Stefan. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I will try to present the Austrian position and to complement on what my colleagues have already said. We have, to some extent, the same experiences in the first 6 months. So what is the situation in Austria? Looking at the numbers, and these numbers I took yesterday from the system, so maybe they are not fully identical to the EMA metrics, but the tendency is clear. Blue is the European submissions under the CTR, red, dark red is the Austrian situation, and for comparison, light red is the Austrian situation at the same time what we had under the directive. And what you can see, this is not a lot. This is definitely not what would we expect if we would have a full switch to the regulation. Of course, this was not unexpected, but we have to say we expected more. And the consequence is that the experience that I can present is based on a very small sample size, just a few trials, and we definitely hope that this will increase in the future. 2 words to the setup that we have to do from the technical part. So there is the member states administrator on the Austrian level, which is the Federal Office for Safety in Healthcare. This is the guys you can see in the top level right corner of my presentation. And what they did and in January and February, and the 1st of February, they created the National Organization Administrator, which is the agency. This is the Austrian Medicines and Medical Devices Agency. This is the Clinical Trial Regulation National Contact Point, which the position that I hold. And this includes all the users the agency needs, including the API user. I will talk later a little bit more on the API as we are an API country. And then we have a more complicated structure than our Finnish colleagues. So we have 5 ethics committees that will work under the regulation. You will not know which one you will get. And there is a 6th role. There is an ethics committee contact point, which also includes the API user for the ethics committee, so that we have a single point of contact in case we need to deal with ethics committees. Lessons learned from this: our legal framework is in place and our legal setup could be very easily administered with Ctas. The functionalities that were there fully supported what we had to set up. This concept of member state administrator, national organization administrator fully worked. At this point, a very huge thanks to EMA pressuring us to set up these things and make these definitions and do all these meetings and what is your national setups, what will be your roles, because it was extremely helpful when we had to set these up on the 31st of January very quickly. So very thankful for that. No relevant technical issues in this setup. It was a little bit tricky for some users, but this is in place and is working. Those who are interested, this is the publication of the Ministry of Health for the regulation and for the ethics committees. And I want to say here that our ethics committees have been extremely helpful partners in all this process. So we were implementing all processes on eye level with including the ethics committees and all steps. And we are still working very closely in the procedures. And this has been a very beneficial cooperation. So for the responsibilities between agency and ethics committees, what were our principles? First principle was direct access to CTRS for all actors. So nobody should be based on second-hand information that is transferred to him by another party. Agency and ethics committees have direct access to all the information that they are entitled to get and that they need for their duties and tasks. We have an API country, so we have national IT systems, and we want to update and download as much information as we can into our national IT systems. This works. The timely is a little bit under discussion, so there is some bugs, and it takes at the moment quite a lot of time, but in principle, it works. And one key concept, and this should always be asked if people are talking about what processes can they set up, also among member states, how do you involve your ethics committees? And we involve our ethics committees in the validation part and in the review part, both for part 1 and part 2. This means our processes are completely separated from a member state where, for example, the ethics committees are just involved in the part 2 assessment. The plan was that each party would work in the national IT systems and that we would coordinate our information in CTS, consolidating of considerations on the national level, consolidating of reports and so forth. The agency is the master of business, the coordinator of the validation step and the part 1 assessment step. This worked. And for the part 2 assessment, there we really transfer the whole process responsibility to the ethics committee. So sending out of RFIs, looking at RFIs, making the conclusion, this is completely in the remit of the ethics committee. The legal final decision on the trial, the authorized task, is taken by the agency. So in summary, all these plans for a common process, again, were fully supported by the functionalities of the system. This concept of viewer, preparer, and submitter, the tasks that EMA provided in this workflow were very supportive and exactly what was needed for this kind of process. So from the deliverables, at the end of the day, somebody has to write a report, fill out a list of questions or look at questions from a specific section. So in Austria, it will be like this. The clinical and statistical assessment reports, list of questions and response assessment will come from the ethics committees, while we will take part of quality and preclinical assessments, the questions that, and the regulatory assessment, the questions that relate to that and the response assessment. Oh, fast. I have said before 2 times, we are an API country. So API is the electronic interface to download and maybe in the future upload things to CTIS. We have a very good IT system that fully supports our workflow, our legal decision-making, which is outside of the agency, and our finances and statistics. So my managers would not want to look at CTIS reports, they want to look at these FAROS reports. So from day one, we were one of those countries that said, we will stay in our own system. This is very good. We want an API. We need an API to work. And for SES committees, the situation is quite similar. They also have their SES committee system to work and which fully supports their special processes. We set up a national data model, and our national workflow is fully functional and fully compatible with the CTS workflow. So big success here. The API is functional with some minor bugs. So here we are very dependent on EMA what we get. So if there is questions on our data model, it's always, do we get this information via the API? Do we get the sponsor contact point, street address, or something like this? Does this come via the API? And if there is problems, we depend on EMA to fix that. And of course, if there is updates to the API or to the CTS data model, we are second in line and have to know this in a timely manner to update our national system. But it works very well, so there is no duplication of data. Nobody has to type something into a system. So when I open my national workflow system, I see the trial as I'm used to, with all the relevant information presented in a very good way. There is minimal manual transfer. I have to download RFI lists and upload reports. Yes, this is what I have, what is maybe something for the future, but all the structured data is there. And this means that my training for my regular assessors who are used to this system is minimal. So I can just send them the task and say, write a report based on this template as you're used to before. The template has changed, but everything else is as you know it, and the information you can also see in our national system. It is trained case managers that will do the special CTIS-based work that will be used with the that will be experienced with the GUI of the CTIS. And I think this is a very good way forward to do that. And it's also the recommendation that I heard in the master training. For the beginning, have specially trained case managers deal with the system, because it is functional, but maybe not user-friendly or intuitive to have a huge number of people who are not very used to this system and will not use it on a constant basis working there. So lessons learned from the different working steps. The validation steps worked quite fine when working together with the ethics committee. This is the delegation of the subtasks. The subtask functionality is a little bit burdensome. There's too many fields in my point of view where non-relevant information has to be put, but okay, we can deal with that. The documents and the way information is presented is a little bit messy or unused unused for us. Here it was very helpful, especially for administrative people, to have this national system, that we have the download of all documents, that we have structured them with the metadata in subfolders as our team is used to. So this is a very good workaround. Challenges that we encountered that we heard before, it's the naming and versioning of documents. A lot of validation requests were of a pure technical nature, that versions did not correspond or the naming was not right. Here I'm very hopeful that this conventional naming that Monique has presented will be a huge benefit. The use of redaction that we saw at some points were a little bit unexpected. Here also guidance is underway, but there were some requests when I saw like a lot of black parts in an IB. This is not what I would have expected. And one personal example that we had in the trial where we were the RMS, it was a trial with an authorized substance in clinical routine, and the initial putting in of the ATC code did not provide the required visibility. So you would not have seen what kind of substance is tested there, and for safety reporting, it would not have been helpful. So we had to change to working via substance representation and formulation. It worked in this case, but maybe for future such cases, best practice is needed. What has to be put in such cases to have the optimal visibility for member states and stakeholders alike. In the assessment and the request of further information, working via subtasks worked perfectly fine. I had to finish some assessment reports this week, so this feeling is still very strong in my mind. The formatting is really not good. So I spend a lot of time in trying to teach Word how to deal with headlines and stuff. So maybe Office is not the best tool to have such a report. This is not the fault of anyone. Office is for writing letters. In the future, there definitely will be improvement by the working groups on how this report should look like, what would be the best structure and information. And of course, this would then have to be implemented by EMA. This is not something that could not be easily improved. What we encountered in respect to challenges, also for validation, but not so critical there, was that the RFI module is not very user-friendly. So the farther you go in the clinical trial assessment process, the more sketchy the support by CTIS gets. Like putting in considerations, and it is okay, this works. Just the overview is not really good to see which are my considerations. I had problems with sorting and so on. If you download this via Excel, it works quite fine, but of course it's a workaround. If you have a system and you have to go on the second system like Excel to see your things, it's not ideal. Formatting is lost. So if people put in bullet points and very careful structuring to make like one consideration very clear in structure, this is completely lost. Special kind of characters are not taken over. And this is one, but not the only reason why the transfer to the assessment reports, if you have to copy a list from there into a document, is quite burdensome. I made the mistake of sending 2 RFIs instead of 1 because I made like check all and then send, and then found out that check all is just for the window that I see, not for the 2 other windows, because it was 3 pages of considerations. This means that the sponsor has to respond to 2 RFIs, and I think if we would not respond to 1, it could result in a lapse. So this, of course, should not happen, but maybe the system can provide something there. And we had problems, and we have to test this in the training environment because it should work for the second round of RFI. This is also a procedure aspect that needs to be discussed. Do we need this? Do we want this for consolidation aspects? We found out that this 1 round of questions to get it perfectly right is very often not enough. And the ethics committees for the last part 2 said, it's okay, but normally they would ask a second round to get all these little typos and inconsistencies and people not fully doing what they should have done quite right. We left some days out in our RFI, but it's technically it was not possible. So we have to see, does this work and should it work? Should we take a few days away from a sponsor to have this second round of administrative changes? Or is this a completely shock for the sponsor? Do they expect to get 12 days and have the full 12 days? And if they get 10 days, they go, what are they doing? Here it was also where we had our one blocking bug. So for 2 trials, a part 2 labs in another country locked this module to some extent. It was fixed by EMA quite quickly. It took some days, and we had workaround by member states during that time. It was not critical for the process in this instance, but with less time and longer time to fix it, it could have been a problem. Overview and searches. Well, the first task that I do when opening the computer in the morning is I put in the advanced search in my group for pending tasks, because everything else is assigned. So this gives me what I have to do for this day. Maybe this could be the default setting because at the moment it's pending and assigned together. The our working strategy is like to assign everything without starting to work, just to go through a list and say, I do this and this and this, and you do that and that and that. And the fact that Cts is opening a task when I assign it is a little bit burdensome. In principle, we have the concept that the work list, as it is sorted, always stays the same. And there is new windows opening from this work list. There is functionality that allows that, but maybe there could be improvement on that. It would be quite helpful. Also, our ethics committees have told this, that they are missing, that they also have to go back to the list, sort it again, search again. And summing up, we are managing the overview so far, but this is with less than 10 procedures. I cannot say what it will be if we have the full amount of initial applications and substantial modifications at the same time. And two specialties at the end. Transition trials was our first experience with CTS. It was a very large and complicated trial that needed 3 attempts to transition, so maybe not the perfect pilot. It was also a problem that they did not harmonize completely under the directive, and this is definitely what you should do. It's in the best practice to do that. And what we have in best practice was definitely put to the test. So we learned something from this. We learned that at the time of transition, we want all authorized documents that we already have uploaded in the system, because why have a system if you not have the full set of documents there? This is in contradiction to the Q&A as it was for years, because with the dry training, people thought, okay, this could be sufficient. Now that we see how it really looks and feels, we will probably change this. Documents have to have the right metadata, right name, right version. And we want to check between these CTS documents and the national documents. As we heard, this is the only assessment step that is done. It's the validation that in the transition that is submitted, but is already authorized on the national level. And this is why the Q&A for transition are currently under revision. And one challenge that remains open is how you will do a subsequent addition of a member state in a transition trial if you do not have an assessment report. And finally, the fast-track trial. We had this because timelines in CTS were always communicated as maximum timelines. And now with the monkeypox example, there were the question, okay, can you do it fast? And how fast can you do it if there is need? This was a special example. RMS was Spain. They did a tremendous job. There was huge personal effort in time from all the member states to get this done. And the target was, can we do it like about 1 week? We were not involved in the first rounds of member states. We were just in the discussions. We could not do it. It's definite that like 1 week is kind of off the table for Austria. And this is because our ethics committees are involved in validation and the part 1. And they need some time for their meetings. This is a minimum of 2 weeks, not making any promises here, but 1 week is not possible. And they can only work on a validated document and translated patient-facing documents. And also, our ethics committees cannot do as we did pre-submission advice or rolling submission, that there is no submission in CTS, but you're sending protocols, you're commenting, sending back the sponsor. Is like, if I would do that, would this avoid any validation comments? This is not our process. So at the moment, we are discussing what would be the maximum that we could offer as a member state if it comes to a fast-track procedure. Very important, of course, would be the criteria under which such a fast-track procedure would be done. Is it a once-in-a-lifetime exception that then happens every month, or is it just under a national or global emergency? Is it just under a pandemic? So these criteria, when this procedure would be done, are very critical. So with this, I'm at the end. I want to finish with a little bit of a pitch, because there was negative at the start. Give the system time and do not look at innovation and its outcome, but bear in mind that all innovation has a starting point. And if you think about traffic and cars, it looks amazing what you can see now in modern megalopolis. At the beginning, it looked like this, and people riding horses definitely said, what is this for? Why did we start using this car stuff? Horses are much better. We are 6 months into the regulation, and I want to cite Bill Gates here: do not overestimate 6 months or first year, but also do not underestimate what you can do in 10 years. And I think in 10 years, looking back, nobody will ask any questions that CTIS and CTR were what put clinical trials for Europe forward. And finally, talking about change, everybody who deals with change knows this. The question is, where are we on this curve? I think as these committees and agencies with their years of preparation, being product owners and in working groups, we are far ahead on this curve. We are definitely at the energy part now. We are all very motivated. We want to see the system working, to have procedures to work on. For sponsors, I have to say the first 3 things are no option anymore. So sorry, you cannot do that. This is off the table. You can only choose between fear and acceptance. And I really invite you to join us on this way. Make the submission, choose the trial, go into CTS. It's not that bad as it sounds. It really works, and it will definitely get better. So join us on the way into the future. Thank you so much.
Many thanks, Stefan, for your presentation and the very wise slides at the end. It is a. Many thanks. Just to announce our next speaker, we have Sophie Academic from France, Clinical Trials Project Manager, the Authorization Division of ANSM in France. She's a pharmacist, specialized in regulatory affairs, has been working for the French agency for 10 months within the clinical trials department. Sophie oversees the implementation of the clinical trial regulation and is the CTS member state master trainer for the French agency. Please, Sophie, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much, Peter. Good morning, colleagues. First, I would like to thank the EMA to give us the opportunity to present the France experience, in particular experience concerning the French agency, and to propose a quick view on the best practices from the successful onboarding of CTIS sponsor user in France. Next slide, please. As an introduction, just to remind that in France, the clinical trial application review is done with a collaboration between the French Medicines Agency and Ethics Committee. Of course, sorry, just the previous slide. Yeah. Ethics committee are independent and separately organized from the agency. However, even if the application part 1 is under the French Medicine Agency responsibility, the protocol is assessed by both the agency and ethics committee, in particular for the ethics aspects. Moreover, for all practical information on part 2, sponsors should visit the Health General Division, Direction Générale de la Santé website. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this slide is to introduce France in terms of numbers. On the first 6 months of CTIS, 43 clinical trials applications have been submitted in France. The applications, yeah.
Terribly sorry. I think we have some
that's fine.
technical difficulties. Just sorry.
Okay. The application submission flow is progressing since February, with a peak at 15 dossiers in May. We have 32 applications under evaluation and 4 clinical trials authorized. Of note, on the 32 applications under evaluation, there are 2 multinational clinical trial applications with France as RMS. And just to give an idea of the clinical trial applications under evaluation per sponsor type, we have a distribution with almost 50-50 between commercial and non-commercial sponsor. So next slide, please. The French agency Medicines have put in place some initiatives to support sponsors for the implementation of the clinical trial regulation provisions. The first one is an open webinar, including a live broadcast, which one is available on replay on the agency website. This webinar was organized by the agency in April 2022. Yeah, and prepared on the basis of the questions received beforehand by the sponsors. The objective was to remind the key point of the clinical trial regulation, its strategic points and impacts, and to introduce the different interaction existing with the actors, which are the French Medicine Agency, the Health General Division, Direction Générale de la Santé, and the Ethics Committee. Then we have the Clinical Trials Working Group, which is led by the agency and conducted also with the sponsor representatives. The objective is to discuss the implementation of the clinical trial regulation and to share information on that topic with sponsors. The agency has updated its notices for sponsor, named Avis au Promoteur, in order to facilitate the application of the provision of the clinical trial regulation and to provide practical information in terms of procedure, format, content, and modalities of submission of application. So it's not, I think there is an issue with my presentation of the screen, but anyway. A question and answer item in French has been provided on the agency website, and ANSM promotes the EMA guidance and events in its website, in particular the Ctis training module of EMA. And I think there is one more item. So it was, there is at sponsor disposal on the agency website a contact form from what we call guichet usager. This is a services to facilitate relation with sponsors. They can ask a general question on the implementation on the clinical trial regulation, of course, and on the Ctis platform. Next slide, please. Regarding the best practices of Ctis users, we wanted to focus on the main ones that we have identified with our experience. So we can start with recommendations on the content of the cover letter. This document should mention all key information on the application to allow a clear understanding of the dossier and its preparation. In particular, the cover letter should be in line with the point B of the Annex 1 of the clinical trial regulation. Then regarding the document naming and versioning, as Monique and Stefan has already explained in their presentation, the name of the document should not mention the date and the version. These data are directly included in the structure data at the time of the download. And the button update should be used to upload a new version of the document. This way enable ability of the document version and to be sure to know which version is the current one, meaning the last one and especially the one authorized. Regarding the publication aspects, Ctis functionality allows to submit two versions of the same document, one version for publication and one version not for publication. The requirement to provide both versions of a document will depend on the document type and content and may not be necessary in every case. Only the for publication version of a document will be published with the timing depending on the deferral rules. The for publication version should not contain commercial confidential information and personal data, but in a general way, all non-clinical data and clinical data is not considered as CCI. So for example, it's not acceptable to submit a for publication version of the IB with all pages redacted. Sponsors should use the deferral publication functionality to protect their CCI. Indeed, the deferral mechanism in Ctis have been introduced to provide sponsors with the possibility to delay the publication of a clinical trial application. Then regarding the way to respond to an RFI, there are two key points, as already explained by Monique. The first one concerns the way to submit the sponsor response to each consideration. It's very important to use the structured data in the Ctis. That means sponsors should answer to consideration one by one and not using a single response document. This is very helpful for the processing of responses by the different assessors within the agency, but also in a European level for the harmonized assessment. So it's also relevant for the publication aspect. The secondary key point concerns the placing of the document within the application when an RFI requests to update an initial document, for example, the protocol or the IB. Sponsors should upload the document directly in the appropriate section of the application, part 1 and part 2, but should not upload the new version of the document directly in the evaluation section. This is for traceability aspect and to have the current version of the protocol, for example, in only one place in the Ctis to be sure to know which version is the one authorized. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. In conclusion, the French Medicines Agency tries to support as well as possible sponsors with their Ctis submissions. We envisage to submit, when applicable, general considerations to guide the sponsor on Ctis functionalities. And we have also supported sponsor. Sorry, just a previous, yeah. Yes, we have also supported sponsor on specific applications when needed by email or call. For example, if an extra RFI is needed to clarify some points of the sponsor responses, we call the sponsor to explain what we expect and how we can proceed to modify the application in order to validate the clinical trial application. And in some cases, we have also assisted by Zoom a sponsor to provide some guidance regarding the Ctis functionalities. And just a last word to underline that the French Medicine Agency is committed to making the best possible to gain much more experience to continue to provide the best possible support to sponsors. So we can say that we learn by working together. So thank you very much for your attention, and thank you, colleagues, to give me the floor today.
Thank you, Sophie. Very nicely done. One of the main messages I noted, good support from the agencies to sponsors is required during the process, before the process, during the process. Many thanks. This is how we do change. Step by step, many thanks. We are at the end of our sponsor of our member states experience. We are going to session 4, the sponsor experience and reflection. We have one sponsor, Gabriela Di Matteo. I present to you. She is the clinical trial application team manager for Pfizer in Belgium, global regulatory operations. She's working in clinical research and regulatory submissions for more than 25 years. She has seen the evolution from the pre-clinical trial directive to the implementation of the clinical trial regulation. She's managing a team submitting clinical trials applications to ethics submissions. This was in the directive in Belgium, both at national level and in Cts. She's a member of Pfizer workstreams, plural, implementing the regulation, tester of Cts since UIT 1 in early 2016. Many of us have been in this position. She is a member of the sponsor PO group since 3 years, highly valued. Please, Gabi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you very much for this very nice and kind introduction. So it's my privilege today to share the views of a sponsor, and I hope I will be able to provide some information and interesting input. Next slide, please, or even the next one. And yes, this is the disclaimer. Can I have the first one, please? So I wanted to present a few figures as well. Unfortunately, compared to member states, obviously I have much less to quote. But anyway, we have submitted so far 2 applications in Ctis, and it is very, very new. I must admit that we were aiming to submit earlier, but due to some contingencies and some issues that we had heard of, maybe countries were not totally yet comfortable, so we decided that we would push back our first submission, and the first one happened end of May, and the second one happened mid-June. So it's very, very new. And nevertheless, we have some nice experience already. So for one of the trials, we had a response from the RMS in 2 days. RMS accepted to be the reporting member state. It was already, we had warned the RMS in advance that we wanted to select them as RMS to seek approval from them, and it worked very, very well. The second submission, we didn't have to have RMS selection because it was a mononational, monocentric study, a phase 1. So there was not much choice to among the RMS. They were obliged to accept, unfortunately. But it was very, very nice because, so as I said, by day 3 after the submission, we had RMS selection confirmed, which allowed us to have the validation, the start of validation be confirmed also very, very quickly. The timelines were very well respected. We received some RFIs for both studies. The RFIs were received in about 10 days. And we responded for the multinational study. It was responded after 7 days, which was not too bad. For the mononational, monocentric, my colleagues were amazing. And after 2 days, they had already submitted the response to the RFI, even if in the meantime, they had a little glitch in Ctis. So anyway, it was responded very, very quickly. Can I have a click on the slide, please? Yeah, thank you. So that's where we are here. Where we are today, and this is what we have learned so far. So we are in the assessment phase for both part 1 and part 2, and we expect to have RFIs in 4 to 6 weeks maximum now to be in line, and I'm sure it will be in line with the regulation. Next slide, please. So it is our first 6 months, and indeed, even if we submitted only recently, we have been working a lot behind the scenes and preparing this very intensively. And we have learned a lot. We have prepared the transition. We have experienced a lot thanks to the sandbox, and finally, we could manage to apply what we had selected as the first trial to go out and on the date that we wanted to submit the trial. So things went well. A few issues were encountered, and we have a few food for thought as well that we would like to share. First of all, an important, the creation of the trial, the system in itself worked well in general. The application form online works really well. So metadata is easy, and don't forget to save. That's my first recommendation. Save very regularly. But it went well. Upload of documents was also easy, even if we had a few caveats, but this was also expected. The download of the application and documents was working as we know it would be working as well. And also the application check, I find it very useful, and for all of us, so for colleagues who are a little bit more comfortable or a little bit less comfortable, the application check also see where you are at that time. And a very exciting moment was when you are ready to click on the submission button. And it was a very nice moment. We were several of us together watching the submission, and it was very interesting. I wanted also to underline that we used both Chrome and Edge for preparing the submission, and I can share that Edge was working correctly as well. We know that Chrome is the recommended browser, but Edge was working correctly. So far so good. I think it's important point to share with the colleagues as well. I think Pfizer is not the only one who is not recommending Chrome as the browser, but we could use both. So I said we had a few issues. We encountered a few of them. So the most burdensome, I would say, so far was the update of some documents, because we had some documents that we had uploaded, which were not the. Oops. May I have my slide back, please? Thank you. So we had uploaded a few documents which were which had to be replaced because we had an updated version internally, and it was not possible to update the document itself in the system. So we said, okay, that's fine. Let's remove the document and we re-upload the new one, as we should be doing. But removing the document was not possible either. So there was a bug somewhere in the system. So we had to use a workaround. We renamed the documents which were not the right one, so to make it clear that they were to be removed at some point, and we uploaded the correct documents. The file size limitation is a known issue, so we knew it was 10 megabytes as a limitation for the time being. But some documents were right on the edge of between just under or just above 10 megabytes, so we had to rework these documents a little bit. So we would be happy when the size limit will be increased. We know it is coming. We also had issues with some of the documents with redaction, because when they were redacted, the file size increased, and we were not expecting this. So we had to juggle a bit with these ones. XCV-MPD for the sponsors will look like a known issue or something not new, but it is true that the new compounds registration is a lengthy process. So the recommendation is that you take this into account, and that's what we do. We check very well in advance if the document is registered, if the compound is registered, because we know we will have to go through the registration process, and it may take a little bit more time than what we expect. From an organization management perspective, we knew and we realized that we had to call in additional resources to work in CTIS, because although the system is centralized and is a wonderful single entry point, it requires new ways of working, and because we are all in a learning curve, sponsors and member states, so sponsors also had to adapt their way of working and trying to find better ways. So we are in this learning curve. What is I will not say a concern, but a point of attention for the sponsors is the local legislation for part 2, because this is evolving. We know not all countries have published their requirements for part 2 if they are to publish some. And so, well, the approach we're taking is that we work with what we have in hand, and so we follow the regulation if we don't have anything local to tell us that we should be doing it differently. But sometimes you have the new legislation being published while you have prepared your dossier already, but that's okay. And so, yeah, I'm very happy to hear that there will be a new guidance to be issued in August, and the EU CTR Q&A is well, as Stefan said, he opens the task every morning, first time in the morning. From my perspective, I open the Q&A and the regulation every morning after I opened CTIS. It's a very, very valuable guide together with the handbook when you need it. What we would like to see improving or to improve ourselves is understanding the evolving business needs. And so it's important for the sponsors to have this huge possibility and very appreciated possibility to work with the Commission and with EMA through the industry, and to provide the feedback that we have, that we want to share with both. I think it's very important and very valuable. So a few steps that we had to add to our way of working from the sponsor perspective. So as I mentioned, some RMS are asking a pre-warning, I would say, before submission if we want them to be RMS. It's a little bit of additional work, but it helps a lot because RMS confirmation comes quickly. It allows both the sponsor and the RMS to be ready and to know what is coming. I think it's important because we are in the starting phase of CTIS, and I think it's important for all. What we discovered when we were preparing the first submission, well, we paid attention, closer attention was to the file names, so that we have our naming convention to make sure we have the correct version identified each time we issue a new document, especially when we are talking about regulatory documents. And so we had to adapt ourselves to update this file name and enter this in CTIS. Not a big deal at all, just that it's taking a little bit more time than what we had initially anticipated. And one important point, and I think it's very important for all sponsors and also for member states to make sure that we provide what is required, is the redaction of documents. So yeah, we have to redact documents. It needs to be done very carefully, very appropriately. We also don't want to over redact when it's not necessary. It means also that we upload 2 documents instead of one. And even for the documents which don't need to be redacted in terms of text, of content, CCI or PPD, we will anyway provide a version which is labeled as public, because documents have metadata, hidden information which is in there, and that we have to remove as well. So that's why member states will see that we provide one document labeled public and no non-public document, but it's just for the removal of metadata. Having these additional documents and having this redaction also means that we have additional documents to be QC'd. So quality check is has always been very important and needs to remain very important. But it is even more important when we have redaction to make sure that everything is redacted correctly. And then last consideration that we have is that we have decided for the time being to create table of content for the submitted document so that we are sure of what we have. So we hope that CTIS will allow us to have an Excel to be downloadable. So that's part of the questions that were asked, and we hope to be able to have it in the future. And for the time being, we have a workaround. Next slide, please. We were talking about RFIs. I would be very quick on that point. I wanted to clarify why sponsors do provide additional document instead of putting the response in the metadata area of the RFIs. It's for quality check again, because these response to RFIs also go through check and quality assessment, and so it's the reason why we provide it as additional document. Next slide, please. So it's a few questions that remain open, but they were already answered by my country colleagues and from Christoph, so I don't need to go over this. Just about the emails generated from CTIS, I've heard it many times from the sponsors. Next slide, please. I wanted to end on a very positive point, is that, of course, we all know and we were all expecting CTIS to bring that simplification, and we know we have it now. I would like also to underline the responsiveness of the service desk, because they were helping us and replying in very short timelines, which allowed us to submit on time, and I think it was very important. So we all are in the same boat. We all have challenges, and I think markets being ready at the same time, we are there yet. Sponsors being ready at the same time, I hope we are there yet as well. And I would like to reassure Stefan that we want to, I think we can consider that we are already at the same level as Austria in terms of responsiveness, and Austria and other member states, that we are in realization and energy about this. So next slide, please. And to be continued, because now we are in validation phase, but in a few months we'll be in assessment and approval phase, hopefully. Thank you very much, and sorry for the time. We are a bit behind. Thank you.
Many thanks, Gabi. Nicely done. Yes, let's be positive for the future. What we can do is shorten a little bit. Any delay was accumulated over the last speakers. It's not one. It's what we can do is shorten the Q&A session a bit, take some time from the break, but I'm sure that we can start at 12:40 with the user feedback from an academic sponsor. Just to go to the list of questions. So I take the one for session 3. Yes, sorry. We have a question. Some member states are seeing pre-approval advice outside CTS before sponsor selects them as the proposed RMS. Is this a requirement? I think, Sophie, you mentioned it, but I think, and I saw it in other presentations from other member states, and intuitively, I think it's a good idea. But Sophie, would you like to expand a little bit on this?
Yes. Yes, I can take it. Yes, Peter. It's not a requirement. Indeed, this is not mentioned in the European regulation. However, for example, in France, we recommend to the sponsor to contact the French Medicine Agency in order to be informed, and it enables the agency to be prepared in terms of workload and resources. But yes, of course, it's not a requirement.
Many thanks. But if I can exchange with you on this, if pre-submission advice would go between sponsor and authority, Would we think that it would reduce the list of questions during validation?
Yes, maybe it could be because if the sponsor has some question regarding the preparation of the application, agency can help him, of course, to prepare the dossier. But it's not considered as a pre-submission. It's just to be informed and to be able to be organized in terms of resources within the agency.
Thank you. It's also.
Can I respond, Peter?
Please.
Sorry to say so, but I think that this is an important topic. To be honest, it is so much. It's so difficult to organize ourselves because you never know when to expect an application, and time is ticking, and also you never know. During validation, is it finalized in 10 days or has it been extended and will it 25 days? So to know on forehand if you are willing to be proposed member states is nice to know. But according to my opinion, with the current rules, it's hard to completely commit.
Yeah.
Because you can say yes, and then suddenly there are more applications, or the validation phase is extended or shortened or whatever, and you have to start your assessment. It also differs whether it is a national or a multinational clinical trial, but it's really hard for our regulators to plan and to have your people ready all the time. That's just a concern I want to share.
I know
and manage expectations.
Yeah. It's completely on voluntary basis. I noted it, and indeed with the RMS selection algorithm, the sponsor can indicate their preference, but it's the algorithm and the assigner with the minimum workspace who would confirm who would be in the bidding, who would be the ultimate RMS. Yes, I fully acknowledge it. It's because it might come up in one of the next presentations. This is why I bring it. I know. I'm looking at the questions. Also for Sophie, particular features for the cover letter. It's
yes, it's the question on what should be contained in the cover letter.
Yeah. Indeed.
Yeah. At that time in France, we do not really check this point. I mean, where this information can be found in the application. What it is important for us is to know if the trial is conducted, for example, vulnerable population, for example, but the location of this information in the application is not a key point. We know where the information should be. And the objective of the cover letter is to clearly identify the specific features of the trial to guide the validator and to allow to understand the preparation of the dossier by the sponsor. But a real table of content in France, we do not check this point.
Many thanks. Sophie, would you also like to bring the next question? Is it possible to only refer in the protocol for the list of IMPs, auxiliaries, medical devices, instead of listing them in the cover letter as well?
Yeah. So according to the point B of the Annex 1 of the clinical trial regulation, the cover letter should mention a list including the regulatory status of all IMP, all auxiliary medicinal product and all medical device, This enables to understand clearly the construction of the application and to validate the application. So this enables also to check if the structured data in the Ctis on the product item are well completed, and if all quality documentation is well provided in the application. So yes, it's important to have this list in the cover letter.
Many thanks. Nice questions. Okay. This is likely for Noemi. For an auxiliary medicinal product, it's in the Excel line 8. Does the general SMPC have to be from an EEA country? Could we use the SMPC from the UK, which is normally used as a reference safety information? Does it need to come from a particular or participating country in the trial?
So thank you, Peter, and thank you, colleagues, for the question. So I think on this one, we're quite clear that auxiliary medicinal products can obviously be defined in the CTIS system by referring to an active substance. The product is marketed already, and an SMPC can certainly be provided in such a case. The product can certainly be sourced from an ICH country, and the UK would be clearly acceptable as well. Huh?
Many thanks. And the next question on auxiliary is Excel line 31. Auxiliary medicinal product data is required to be entered into CTS from XCV-MPD, but if the sponsor has, for example, a rescue medication, it's not always possible to identify it as one product. How should it be handled?
So just to complement, I guess, the answer that I was given minutes ago, Peter, I think for this one, we can also confirm that the system is set up in such a way that the sponsor can refer to an active substance or an ATC code. So in such a case, they don't have to provide a proper marketed trademark. And with this setup, it certainly make the reference to the product much easier, and they can refer to the active substance instead of specifying a particular product.
Okay, many thanks. And then, if okay, we can go to line 16. It's on CTS documents and the Q&A are updated. Could changes be highlighted or put in track changes? It's perhaps something for you or for Christophe.
Yeah, so I think in this question, we've got a combination of documents mentioned. So I guess the Excel structure is probably referring to the supportive documentation that EMA has published on the supporting section of the EMA website. So you can actually access as an XML file there where that list all the various structured data and documents that the sponsor would need to complete in a clinical trial application, and then obviously the Q&A of the commission. So I think the requester is saying, oh, can we have the track changes? I think what we want to do on the structured data is to have an history version to explain what was the changes made. But I guess I will answer by saying we're not going to have track changes as such, but there will definitely be an historical section where the user can actually verify what the changes have been.
Many thanks. Then I would go over to lines 18 and 19. These are for Christophe. We indicated for Christophe. If the European trial number, if it is modified in case of a resubmission, does EMA, well, it's not EMA, accept sponsors to submit study documents without this code and only with the protocol code, and linked to that for the next question is in fact very similar to the first one. So can sponsors submit a study documents without the European trial number, which I think I saw in ICH TCP?
Christoph, you are on mute.
Sorry, no, I was of course double muted, colleagues, because that's what we tend to do in these meetings. Apologies, Peter. I was answering to you. Theoretically, according to the legal text, the EU CT number is the unique identifier at European level. So it should ideally figure on all documents in order to make it's clear that a given document is linked to a given submission and a given authorization in CTIS. If I'm not mistaken, but this is a purely CTIS related question, a resubmission number still has the basic EU CT number in there. So I would say if that would be on documents, the problem seems not to be that broad. I mean, the resubmission, if I'm not mistaken, has the two last digits different, but the rest of the number is the same. So, I mean, identification would then still be possible, even if those two last digits would change. Thank you.
Thank you. Very pragmatic. This question we had several times. Many thanks. Okay. A question for Uti. It's Excel line 20. May ethics ask for a qualification of a deputy investigator, which is not mandatory? I think I know what you will say. Only recommended to be in place in some member states and might change in the course of a trial and needs to be notified, approved again. Could you take this one? Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, thank you for the question as well. This is not a new question. We have had it many times during the directive era as well. Based on regulation Annex 1, there's a requirement to list the name and position of the principal investigator. And that is interpreted as one investigator per site is enough and the requirement. So for the sake of minimizing the workload, it's really not advisable to require CVs for all participating researchers. And yes, based on regulation, that is quite simple and should be interpreted that way. Knowing also that some member states might have had different kind of approach on this, but directive is quite clear on this. Thank you.
Many thanks. Then something I think it's at Excel line 36. Will the invoice for the fees for the ethics and the health authorities be uploaded? I think you answered it before. You handed, or should it happen in a separate mail to the sponsor?
Yes, this is something that is member state specific thing, but member state is of course obliged to communicate this through their websites or whatever the system they would like to use. But this is something that the system itself does not send. You cannot upload that such invoice from the system.
Many thanks.
Peter, this is Christoph speaking. Sorry to jump into this Q&A session, but I want to point out as well specifically for this answer that what is in the question seems to be not in line with instructions of the CTR. Article 87 says that a member state shall not require multiple payments to different bodies involved in the assessment. So there's no different payments to local health authority ethics. There's one payment for one activity, and that's a legal requirement stemming from the legal text itself, Article 87. If that were not the case, then the implementation in the member states is not in line with the regulation. Can be that there still are some transition problems, but as such, one payment per activity per member state. That's the line.
Yes. In fact, I mentioned that during my presentation, but forgot to mention now. Yeah, true, Christoph. Very good point.
Yeah, noted single fee, yeah, per member state.
Per application, yes.
Okay. Yeah, something similar. Excel line 13, also for you, Otti. Patient cards, questionnaires, patient diaries are documents provided to patients after consenting and not required as per regulation. No section in CTS neither. Some ethics still request these for colleagues. Yes, we have a broken record, I think. Oti, would you like to jump on it?
Yes, just for the sake of repetition, I think it's good to point out once more that Commission will publish question and answer in question and answer guideline one very relevant answer to this question as well. So there has been negotiations between member states, and the guideline has been drafted with the Commission's expert group, and it's quite near to be ready to publish.
Many thanks. Question 11. On the site, also for you, Oti, the site contracts are submitted for evaluation in some countries with directive. For the regulation, should the site contracts be uploaded in CTS?
Yeah, this is very interesting question as well. It is stated in the Annex 1, number 69 to 71, that brief description of the financing of the clinical trial is the requirement. So, for example, in Finland, we have interpreted this, that the basic content, or the summary of the financial aspect is enough. And also, if there are more detailed information needed, that should be also communicated by the member state concerned. And with everything, basically in evaluation, these clinical trials, that if in case the information provided is not sufficient, we can always ask the supplement the application, so ask for more information. But based on Annex 1, description of any other agreement between the sponsor and the site shall be submitted. But then again, I would like to stress the word description. So I guess these actual contracts can contain all kinds of information that is really not needed when evaluation on the ethical, for example, ethical acceptability of the clinical trial.
Many thanks. Just Monique, would you like to add something to this important question on site contracts, or it's okay for you?
No, I completely agree with Uti that it is a description, and we don't need full clinical trial agreements between sponsor and clinical trial sites. So,
okay, many thanks.
Support the answer from Uti. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. We are almost at the end of the questions. It's Excel, for example, Excel line 24. Once you submitted and a RFI is issued, will there be an email notification? I think I saw it in the previous speakers. Uti, what would be your recommendation? Is there a need for an email notification?
All the communication should be done in Ctis. As already also confessed, Finnish authorities have not been so far be able to communicate only in Ctis. We have maybe it's this starting point we have now with using Ctis, but that should not happen. That we should stick to Ctis and communicate all the relevant and important aspects there.
Many thanks. I would like to wrap up the Q&A session, leaving us a small break. What I would recommend, dossiers in a bit higher quality when they are sent. Of course, in the beginning, the very first pioneers, they will have teething problems, child diseases. But if the dossiers are in a little bit better quality, then we have less error-wise going back and forth, and I think a little bit more smoother approval cycle, hoping that over some time member states will harmonize the requirements in part 2, only those of the regulation, and then by definition we have less error-wise going back and forth. But many thanks. So if we break now and we are back in 5 minutes, then we can take a glass of water. Many thanks. See you. Hello, colleagues. I think we can start with, I think it's session 5. Many thanks. So I would like to introduce you Tail Patrick Brown. She is working for an academic sponsor. She's one of the very first people who have submitted, with some difficulties, I must admit, who have submitted one of the most important trials currently in COVID. She's very courageous, and we supported her in this. Dale, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Talle Patrick Brown, and I work as the trial manager for SolidAct, which is as they have said, a project looking at COVID, not rescue therapies, but therapies for patients in hospital. Sorry, I guess I need the next slide because that actually has all the things on it. Here we go. So we were one of the first people, I think we were the first people to put a trial into the system. And we are a multi-center pan-European clinical trial platform testing drugs to treat moderate and or severe hospitalized patients with verified COVID-19. So basically we're looking at drugs that may help to speed up the process of healing for the patients. In the first arm, we were looking at baricitinib, and many of you may have heard of this now because the WHO has decided that there's enough evidence to put it into basically general practice. So we are now working on immunocompromised patients with that, and we have another arm called Axel SolidAct, which I can't really tell you a lot about because it's not authorized yet, but it's looking at another drug, obviously. And we are currently, Bari is approved in 14 countries, and I have a +3 there because there are 3 waiting to sign on. They're having problems with legal documentation and whatnot. And there's 102 centers in total that are active in our system right now. And we expect more actually in the future. Right. So we've had some positive experiences with Ctis so far. We like the transparency because as Norwegians, we are pretty happy to share everything with everyone all the time. So this has been very good for us to be able to make documents available, not just to the patients, but to interested parties all over. And that's been really great. But it's also a bit of an issue. I'm sure you guys have talked about this. You have to be aware of the GDPR and redact your documents. However, on the whole, it's been very positive. And we also liked that there is a full audit trail. So you can see when somebody has changed something. And I think that can only be good for medicine, in that if you have to change a protocol, but the patients don't know what happened or what has happened in the past, I think it makes it more difficult for them to make an informed choice. So actually, this is great. And there's now no doubt what has been approved and has not been approved, which is also very good. One portal for everything, regulatory and ethics, also a good thing. And fixed timelines to an extent, with the possibility of tacit approval is also something that is quite useful for us. But there's been some minor hiccups. So the next slide. So we are a very large trial with a lot of centers, and it's a lot of coordination. Currently, all the different countries seem to have different requirements. Every country. I can't think of one country that has been the same as another country at this point. So there's a lot of new requirements for documents, a lot of signatures required. Some places won't accept electronic signatures, some will. There's new templates. Some countries have their own templates and they won't allow a central template. So there's a lot of coordination that way. There's also a lot of requirement inconsistencies. So for our part, we've had some countries actually come back to us in the RFI and say, we must have a signed site agreement before the trial is approved. And this is actually quite unusual because generally you don't sign the agreement with the site until after the trial is approved because it might not get approved. But most places don't require this, so we have to keep track of that. Some countries need data protection officer statements specifically, some others don't. Some need copies of annotated ECRF, some don't, and it just goes on and on and on. The list is endless. You know, some wanted the NCIs and lists of the people working inside the clinical units, and it just goes on. The second thing is that the Ctis system wasn't designed to take care of platform trials. And so when we went to create the initial application for our project, we were a little bit unsure what to do. So we have a lot of arms upcoming for this trial, and for each arm or investigation, we have to enter it as a brand new trial. And this means that in most countries, we have to pay full fees for every arm that we add, as opposed to just updating our system. And that's actually very expensive, and it's a huge chunk of the budget. And also, we don't know from day to day who's going to decide whether we're an academic trial or not, how much money we should pay. We have to pay for everything that comes through. So it's actually a real problem for us. And also, we have to redo all of the documents every time we start a new arm. And that's 600 plus documents we have to wrangle every time. And that's not actually lying. We actually have more than 600 documents for each arm of this trial. And every time we start a new arm, all the documents have to go through the entire inspection process again, which wastes a lot of time, where documents are sometimes just straight duplicates. The other thing is, you know, when you have different eyes on the documents at different times, then they have different questions, which means we have to go through some of the RFIs more than once. And that's also a waste of time for us. The other issue is where on earth do you put the master protocol, and how do you refer to it? And we've had problems with this already in that it's not immediately clear to some of the ethics committees where certain documents are. But these are things that will have to be thought about in the future, I think. The other thing is that the system is rather unforgiving and it standardizes things, but it also doesn't allow us to have a lot of variation or deviation. So where we have a trial where we have all these different centers and things like that, we have to come up with a lot of workarounds for problems in the system and individual itemized things that happen. I can't really go into that right now as we don't have time. But yes, it means that we have to think outside of the box to fix a lot of the problems. Next slide. So we've also had a lot of technical challenges, and when I say a lot, I mean a lot. We have 27 support tickets that have been submitted by me alone. There are more for my team, and that's probably half of the problems that we've had, because some we just decided we didn't have time to take care of. We're a very small team. So we have a lot of support tickets in. Many of these tickets have been closed before a resolution was reached. We also had 3 false starts due to unsolvable problems where we couldn't fix things in the system and we had to start new applications entirely. So I have a few things that I can recommend here for people, and that is if you are starting a new application, to make sure that you have all your documents and your information in spreadsheets ready to go and everything in one place in case you have to start again, because if you don't, it's a logistical nightmare. So there's still a lot of outstanding issues that we've put into the system. One of the things that we had trouble with was adding sites in the OMS is quite an onerous process. So you need to make sure that all your sites are entered into the OMS and that you know their number prior to starting, but this takes quite a long time. So you need a lot of lead time on this right now because a lot of places are not registered. A lot of places don't know who should register. And it became a logistical nightmare for us trying to figure this out. Luckily, we got some help with that from the EMA. Thanks, guys. But this was kind of crazy with 102 centers, and probably 50% were not registered at all. It's difficult to work on country-specific RFIs in parallel. So currently, only one person can be in the RFIs at a time editing, meaning that I can't work with my colleague at the same time on different RFIs. So it means that you need to have really good coordination, and that means having maybe a chat program or something to say, hey, are you in the document? I need to do an update or something. So make sure that you're able to get hold of each other really quickly if you're working in a team. Some of the uploaded documents that you put into the applications won't show up on other people's side. So the regulatory and ethics people sometimes can't see documents that you have uploaded. On the flip side, they can see some stuff that you can't see. And we had a bit of an issue 2 weeks ago where they were asking us why we had clicked a button, which wasn't visible to us. So you have to be aware that there are differences based on who can see what. So if someone comes back to you and they say they can't see a document, just take a screenshot and send it to them, and you can ask the help desk to give you a hand with fixing up the rights so they can see it. And an ongoing problem that we have had, which it doesn't seem very big, but it kind of is that you still can't put dates in the past, even for transitional trials that are already running. And this means that you can't submit your application and you can't submit RFIs. So we found this out the hard way. It doesn't necessarily show up as an error. It doesn't highlight itself. So if you do have something come up like that, it could be the date. So take a look at that first. And that's even for ongoing trials. Right, and next. So some suggestions. When you submit a ticket to the help desk, make sure you give them the time and the date, the username of the person it happened to, the browser you're using. Chrome is the only one that is supported apparently, but Edge might I was told might work. But I know most hospitals in Europe don't have Chrome or Edge, so you might need to work at home to submit your application like we are. Take a screenshot that includes the time and date in the corner. That helps them as well. And try to capture the flag in the top right corner because that can actually help too. If you know how to grab code, then do that, use the console, and then explain the problem step by step. And also be prepared to reopen the ticket a lot of times. We've had a lot of tickets closed without being resolved. And of course, they need to be resolved. So be prepared to reopen them. And advocate for yourself if you're not happy with the resolution. You might have to reflag it. That said, that I think that everybody's very open to wanting to help, and I think it's helpful to them for you to flag these things up, even if it seems really small. It might be the tip of the iceberg. So as a former coder myself, I feel for these guys. This is a tough situation. So any help you can give them is probably really great. Next slide. And that's it. So thank you to our national authority, NOMA, and the EMA and the EC for all the help with trying to get our trials in. We know that our trial is a nightmare. We are an academic sponsor. We don't have huge resources, but we were able to put things in thanks to you guys. So thank you very much for the help. And I hope that some of these tips will help people. Thanks.
Thank you, Tala. Many thanks. Just in the interest of time, Monique, would you like to say something on, so in fact, Tala first, your trial is authorized, published. Monique, thank you. It must have been hard, I acknowledge. Monique, would you like to say something on the Q&A on complex or platform trials?
Yes, I want to make the people aware that the EMA, and it was a combined action from the EMA, the HMA, and the European Commission has just recently published a Q&A on complex clinical trials, where some of the elements which you just presented are addressed, also with respect to the submission of a clinical trial under one EU trial number or a separate clinical trials, and what to do with your master protocol. Some of the things are there addressed. So please take a look, and well, if you have additional questions, please let us know. Thank you.
Many thanks. Yeah. Okay, next speaker would be Noemi Manant. She's one of our most valued colleagues. Noemi is Principal Scientific Administrator at EMA. She joined the European Medicines Agency in March 2011 as the Principal Scientific Administrator in the Compliance and Inspector sector. Today, she's a member of the TDA, Data Analytics and Methods Task Force, and is leading the operations work stream in the clinical trial system, enabling the application of the clinical trial regulation. Please, Noemi.
Thank you very much, Peter. So after all this great information that we've actually received today, what I will do is to provide the colleagues and the sponsors and the member states online information about the clinical trial training environment, and also provide some information about communication. So if we could have the next slide, please. So the training environment, so obviously today we were hearing about the clinical trial information system in this production environment and the feedback on reflection and experiences. what we would like to emphasize is that we also have a training environment, and that this training environment today is a copy of the CTIS as we see it in production. And what is important to think is that this training environment can certainly support the users, especially the sponsors, while we are still in a transitional period. So the training environment, as we see it, is will only have fictitious data. The users must ensure that no personal data, commercial, confidential, or sensitive data are uploaded to the system. The information the system from time to time will experience some downtime, obviously, because we have to sometime wipe out the data. We also need to support some upgrade of the system. So what we want to say also is that this training environment is provided by the agency also to support training events. So you must have seen that when we actually have the bite-sized talk, we use that environment to actually present some of the functionalities. Next slide, please. So very much to support the hands-on from the sponsors. So what we have actually introduced is that we want to change the conceptual use of the training environment to provide access for larger communities of users. So the approach for the member state will not change, but what we need to report is that obviously from November to May 2022, so November 2021 obviously to May 2022, the access to the sponsors was very much provided on a call basis and ad hoc to make sure that first of all the sponsors who were really going to use CTIS first of all were provided access to this training environment to really have hands-on and understand how to familiarize themselves to the system. So I think as we're looking in the future and think that from January 2023, the sponsors will need to submit any new clinical initial clinical trial application to the production environment. We want to open up the training environment to all the users and all sponsors. So this is why today we will introduce, and this is actually going to be done this month, we're providing access and providing a generic blank account to most requesters. And this is for any sponsors who've already answered the surveys that were completed since November of 2021. And the access will be done on what we call the trial-centric approach. This will really enable a lot of users to actually familiarize themselves with the system. Obviously, the use will be done with a fictive organization. So if I work for Beautiful Pharma, I won't be able to use the Beautiful Pharma to actually do my initial trial application, but I will need to use the fictive organization that I'm being provided by EMA. So this rollout, as I said, will be done this month, and we really expect that this will maximize the number of users and make sure that all the sponsors out there can actually address their need of training within the system. Next slide, please. So in terms of user support, so now I'm going to present you with all the various initiatives that EMA has actually launched. On the next slide, please. So currently there is what we called a sponsor and user program that is focused on CTIS functionalities. This is a training that is done and supported by DIA. We've already had quite a few events in this first quarter of 2022. Since and up to now, really. And we're looking at additional sessions coming up the second semester of 2022. And you can see the dates here. So if you're interested, do get in touch and do look on our website, but also on the newsletter that I will communicate in this communication. So next slide, please. So in terms of support to our users, I think you must have been made aware of all the various events that have gone through that we've actually supported and enabled to answer questions. We've got the CTIS bite-sized talk. There's been done on a regular basis. It will go and continue up until the end of 2022 at least on a monthly basis. We are currently doing those bite-size. We basically present different functionalities. You have the ability to then revisit the session because they are broadcasted and they are recorded. There is a live Q&A sessions that we try to answer most of the questions, but as you know, we have a limited time. But then those questions can also be taken at further other events, like the walking clinics. And these are the CTIS walking clinics are purely on CTIS functionalities. We try not to answer CTR questions, but obviously there is sometimes borderline between the two. But again, those events are live, they're broadcasted, and you can certainly revisit the recorded sessions. The next one, as it is for the bite size, are provided on the slides here. And then we've recently also added what we call the OMS troubleshooting sessions. We've started the very first one yesterday. It was extremely well attended. We have our colleagues from the OMS team, very competent and extremely well proficient to actually answer all the questions that are posed on OMS. So please do get in touch with or do look at the next event. You can ask the question in advance. It's very useful because it certainly allows us to direct and organize the presentation. And I think our colleague from OMS yesterday had done quite a great job in really focusing the presentation on the questions that had been posed. So do get in touch with those as well. So next slide, please. So in terms of communication, and next slide, please. What needs to be said is that obviously we are looking at the 6 months today of CTIS, but obviously we cannot forget the 20th of May, which was the International Clinical Trial Day. EMA on this particular topic did publish quite a few information on our website. Do look at those. Even if the day has passed. But what's important is that it's just to reiterate the importance of clinical trials and the research that we all are doing and all are interested in today. So do get the information here as well on this particular, that is published on this particular page. Next slide, please. And obviously, a very important document here, the clinical trials newsletter. This newsletter is published on bi-monthly, I think, so every 2 months. The next one will be published in July 2022, and this is a very good documentation in order to keep in touch with what is going on with CTIS, with ActEU, with any new information coming up. That is in relation with the CTR. So also do, if you haven't done that already, do contribute, if you want to contribute, obviously for sure, but do register with this newsletter. Next slide, please. And also on any release communication on CTIS, you will want to refer to the actual CTIS website, where we have information on website outage and system release. This is sometimes looking a little bit technical in terms of documentation provided, but this is very much very interesting, important also for the known issues. So for any of the users of the system, do get familiar with the known issues of CTIS. As any system out there are always some, let's say, some issues that a user can encounter. Those that are already known are published. In sometimes some cases, a workaround is actually proposed. So do also consult this website outage and system release page on our website. So next slide, please. So this is to finalize the presentation on the Ctis communication and training topics. So this communication and now is finished. I'll hand over back to Peter.
Thank you, Noemi. how I would resume this. This is all mandatory reading, understanding before people start touching CTS. Have this training material, the environment under your skin before you start touching CTS. Many thanks. Anna, if you're ready, I will introduce you. She's Anna Zonderletti, our appreciated program manager for the accelerating trials in Europe. She has a diploma of dietetics, human nutrition, followed by a bachelor in pharmacy. She worked in the area of clinical trials in Spain 7 years and moved to London to join the EMA in 2006, where she spent her initial years coordinating initial trial marketing authorization procedures. She then moved to, thank you. She then moved to aspects in the naming of medicinal products, quality of product information, labeling for advanced therapy, medicinal products, the ATMPs. She's currently the program manager for the ACTU, a European clinical trials transformation initiative, which is co-led by European Commission, Heads of Medicines Agency, and EMA. Please, Anna, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, and good afternoon now. If I could have the slide, brilliant. Thank you. So yes, ACT-EU, Accelerating Clinical Trials in the EU, which really goes hand in hand with the Clinical Trials Regulation and CTIS to strengthen the clinical trials environment in Europe. So if I could have the next slide, please. Many of you will have heard already of ACT-EU, but we're really in our initial phases, so you'll be hearing much more about us as we progress. Right, so I was saying the drivers for clinical trial transformation, of course, we have the Clinical Trial Regulation and CTIS, and the driving force for harmonization of clinical trials and regulatory processes to increase efficiency via digitization with the IT system. Of course, there's new tools and methods as well with innovation as a driving force for clinical trials, with updates on decentralized complex clinical trials. So there's a need for updated guidance in different areas of clinical trials, and the need to have large multinational clinical trials addressing public health issues. If we look at data, next slide, please. Right. If we look at the climate for clinical trials in Europe, supported by data that we have in NutraCT, we can see that from data from the last 15 years indicates that we have a large number of clinical trial sponsors that are commercial sponsors. So that's about 60% of the sponsors in NutraCT are commercial sponsors, but there's a large amount, 40%, that are non-commercial sponsors. And of those non-commercial sponsors, if we drill down into the numbers even more and look at the average number of trials average number of member states per clinical trial, we can see that for commercial sponsors is about 3 times as much. So the average is 3.1 member states in a clinical trial, whereas for non-commercial sponsors, it's only 1.2. So there's definitely room for improvement in terms of having multinational clinical trials led by non-commercial sponsors. And we already saw the presentation by Tada providing all the complexity of the new IT system for multinational trials. So room for improvement for sure. Next slide, please. So this is where accelerating clinical trials in the EU comes in. So it's probably not enough just to have the clinical trials regulation and to have
CTIS. Hand in hand with these two, it's also important to have a change initiative that brings together all the different actors in the European landscape working on clinical trials so that we can support innovation and drive better patient outcomes. So of course, we build on the momentum of these two key pillars, regulation and Ctis. It's supported by the network strategy to 2025 and the EU pharmaceutical strategy, both of which highlight innovation as a driver for development and better patient and state-of-the-art medicines for patients. So ActEU was born in January, at the middle of January this year. In the presentation, you'll find links to the press release and the paper defining that explains ActEU in detail. So really, we can say that 2022 is the year of the clinical trial with these three initiatives. If I could have the next slide, please. So the objectives of ActEU, this is very high level, and as I said in the paper, you can look at it in a little bit more detail, is to support the conduct of large multinational trials. And we really want to support SMEs, academia, and HTAs. And also very much focus on unmet needs, rare diseases, public health crisis. So ActEU is really looking at these areas. There's a lot of scientific advice provision within the European Union at different time points of the medicine's life cycle. We want to facilitate a coordinated scientific advice that supports trial authorization and marketing authorization throughout the life cycle. So make sure that advice is aligned, that different actors are informed of what's happening. Also, there's a need to have a unified European approach for trial processes and agreements at strategic matters at international level. And very importantly, there's a big drive to have engagement with stakeholders to make sure that we have a neutral space to listen to stakeholders and really deliver inclusive patient-oriented medicines development and delivery across different populations. Now, how does this translate into the work of ActEU? Next slide, please. So ActEU has been formalized into 10 priority actions, and at the top of the slide there, you see 2022, 2023. The reality now has been, now that we are working on the deliverables of our plan, the reality would actually be a 4-year multi-annual work plan. So the 10 priority actions for ActEU begin with, let's say, first of all, looking at the governance of clinical trials within the European Union. It's to understand what are the different expert groups and working parties doing and make sure that the right groups are doing the right things. So rationalize our governance and make sure that it's fit for purpose for what we want to achieve. Very importantly, the successful and timely implementation of the clinical trials regulation. This is priority action 2. It focuses on KPIs that have already been mentioned today, and also the development of a dashboard for European clinical trial for the European clinical trial environment, and also to develop processes to promote these larger multinational clinical trials, specifically looking at academia. We are aiming to establish a multi-stakeholder platform, so a neutral platform where different stakeholders can come together to talk about clinical trials and drive development. We will be focusing through priority action 4 on GCP modernization, with workshops in the pipeline to discuss the upcoming ICH E6 revision 3. There will be a priority action that is focused on data about clinical trials. So we are sitting on a lot of data that stems from clinical trials, and it's very important to look at that data and make sure that on the basis of this evidence, we can have an impact on our policy making and funding. In addition to this, priority action 6 is focusing on communication campaign, and of course, we're hearing a lot about the upcoming mandatory application of the CTR. So the focus of priority action 6 for the upcoming month is to really ramp up the communications on the mandatory clinical trial regulation and use of CTIS. The reinforcement of coordination between scientific advice on clinical trial approval and design, and linking that to methodologies, making sure that we have the right guidance in place in terms of new methodological approaches, is the focus of priority action 7. Priority action 8, very closely tied in, is the development of these methodologies guidance, For example, there is innovation in artificial intelligence and machine learning impacted clinical trials, complex clinical trials, which have been mentioned already. There is a publication already out there, a Q&A, decentralized clinical trials. There's work ongoing with a recommendation paper coming out from CTCG, CTEG, and the GCP Inspectors Working Group on decentralized trials, etc. Then there is a priority action 9, that is looking at the successful establishment of clinical trial safety monitoring and bridging to the EU for Health Joint Action and its integration into pre- and post-marketing safety monitoring framework. And last but not least, training, to have a clinical trials training curriculum on drug development and regulatory science with links to SMEs and academia. And again, the drive for the mandatory CTR next year will have a focus on training as well that's necessary. Next slide, please. This slide has gone a bit funny, but basically it's just to highlight that these 10 priority actions, which are easy to run through if you go through them sequentially, can actually be orchestrated into 4 domains, which are governance and integration, engagement, methods and practice, and impact. We haven't fully operationalized yet. We have to really think about how this will work, but this was the initial thought process of having priority actions grouped by themes, which would be these 4. Next slide. We wanted to give just a little bit of a flavor on one of the priority actions, priority action 8, methodologies. As was mentioned earlier, the complex clinical trials Q&A has been published, providing guidance on the planning and conduct of complex clinical trials and the design of master protocols. And we are envisaging that there be an interactive or a workshop, a multi-stakeholder workshop towards the end of the year, to openly discuss this complex Q&A and put forward any questions to the regulators. In regards to decentralized clinical trials, as I mentioned, we're working with the European DCT group that's made up of CTCG, CTEG, and the Inspectors Working Group. And we will be publishing next week, save the date, for a multi-stakeholder workshop, which will have a live broadcast in the morning, and then there will be some face-to-face interaction. It has to be a relatively limited number of participants due to still restrictions in terms of meetings, but we're hoping to have in October a multi-stakeholder engagement on this topic. So please watch the space on the clinical trials web pages of the agency, the ACT-EU specifically. And there will also be further upcoming multi-stakeholder events. You can find information in the clinical trials highlights on our website as well. And if I could have, I think I have one more slide left, please. Other important initiatives strengthening clinical trials, obviously the work of the Clinical Trials Coordination Group, bringing together the experts in clinical trials from the national competent authorities with the objective of harmonizing procedures and optimizing the environment. The work done on safety monitoring, the joint action also on expedited COVID-19 assessment, and of course the extended mandate of the emergency task force, which also provides support to clinical trials and scientific advice, etc. So there's many other initiatives, but ACT-EU ties into all of this. That's the important point of ACT-EU. We're not taking away the work doing from any of these groups. These groups continue to function, but ACT-EU acts as an umbrella to ensure that we're all driving in the same direction. Next slide. Could I have the last slide? The last one is multi-stakeholder platform. So watch the space for this. There will be the development of a multi-stakeholder platform. There should be a kickoff meeting the beginning of next year, and this will be a place where the clinical trials community can come together, the different actors, to discuss key topics, raise new needs, and drive new developments. And again, the clinical trials newsletter, the EMA website dedicated to ACT-EU. Now I think that is my last slide. So I'd like to thank everybody for listening, and I'll take any questions if there are any.
Many thanks, Hannah. Very smooth. Just in the interest of time, I'm checking. We were checking the questions we were still having from this morning. I can do briefly 2 questions. This is before I would hand over to Noemi. Change of sponsor. Yes, we are looking at it to have it in our roadmap. Another question which was still unanswered: if sites are not registered in OMS. No, we are working on. So for the moment, you have to register them first in OMS before you can use it. And but I'm pretty sure that in most of the countries, very much all trial sites are already in OMS. The countries I know well. Can be not everywhere, but so please register it in OMS first, and then we will do it. There is a foreseen change on the system, and you will be informed of this, where the trial site can be done inside Cts. And then, if possible, yes, I would like to hand over to Noemi. If you would have any questions on OMS or the wrap-up closing remarks, please, Noemi.
Yes, Peter, hello. Very happy to do the closing remark, just to say that obviously this is just the beginning with CTIS. We've had a breadth of experience provided to us today. We've talked about the metrics, and we understand that there's a state intake. The member states have nicely said, don't be afraid of the system. It's a great tool. It's one way for, as the sponsors said, to have very clear timelines. We understand that regulators are certainly provided more clarity, and this is also coming with updating question and answers from the commissions. We've heard from the EMA with a breadth of events in terms of bite size and walking clinics. We've heard from the sponsors also on additional steps that can be taken in order to make sure that the dossier is of quality before it actually goes into the system. We've heard about the non-commercial sponsors mentioning the transparency and the clarity in the system in what is being submitted. We've heard about some very good feedback on the service desk, as well as some challenges. We've heard also about the acceleration of clinical trials, and I think this is really all coming together, and I think we can certainly look forward to the end of the very first year of the transition period. We are at 6 months at this point in time, and I think this is already a great success. So thank you very much to all the speakers, and then I'll hand over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Noemi. Let me thank you, each of us, each of the colleagues on screen, behind the screen, instrumental in making this happen. The teams behind CTS, I think at peak moments there were 100 people working at CTS. Encourage for everyone, lots of encourage for future users. We get there step by step, and I would like to wish you a very nice day and summer break. Many thanks.